Cirucci team brief here. It's been a couple weeks since our last one. I'm glad we're all back here. It's September 17th, 2019. Got Johnny and George with me this morning. Should be a great show. We got lots of archived notes to share with you guys. But just to continue what we were speaking about before we went live. I'm going to screen share here, but we were talking about the silver key of the Pope, the Pope symbol. I'm going to link the blog post I did on this because I analyzed the shield, the official Vatican website describing the shield of Pope Benedict XVI, and you can see the silver and gold key on Benedict XVI's shield, and the Vatican website describing Benedict XVI's shield said there is a long tradition of the popes using the gold and silver keys in their crests and shields to symbolize the gold key, the spiritual, and the silver key, the temporal power of the Pope. But you can see but if you can see my screen here on the U.S. Treasury logo, this is the silver key here. This is the Pope's temporal power. You can see there's also on this Treasury logo, there's a Roman laurel wreath in the background. That's that logo right there. And I'm going to show you here quickly. I found the archive source from the National Security Agency. As you can see my screen here on my Jesuit World Order blog. This is the post I did here. Oh, log me out of my Reddit here. Just give me a second. But I'm going to show you here that the NSA actually admits this on their own government website, that the silver key represents the sword. So here's the archive site here. I'll link this in the description. Here, the National Security Agency insignia. I'm just going to read this part here. The dector and sinister talons of the bird clutch a silver key. The key in the eagle's talons, representing the key to security, evolved from the emblem of St. Peter the Apostle and his power to loose and bind. It also symbolizes the mission to protect and gain access to secrets. And here's the picture of the key. And this is coming from the official NSA website, as you'll see right here. Like they're admitting that the logo, the silver key in the logo, with the sinister talons of the eagle, represents the Pope's spiritual power. There's the silver key of the Pope, right there. But you can see, I'll highlight it where the NSA admits this. This is where they admit it right here. And as George brilliantly pointed out, this is the same silver key that's on the Treasury logo. So this papist symbolism is, scattered all throughout. It's overwhelming how present it is in the United States government. I did a video just specifically on the Roman fasces aspect of it in the United States government, but it's all over the place. Like, this is the Pope's silver key representing his temporal power, and the eagle itself is a symbol of the Roman Empire, and the eagle is on probably like 25 U.S. government seals, I think, at least. But
we could do an entire week of symbolism. We could do an entire week of whether it's the fleur-de-lis or the Maltese cross or the fasces or the papal keys. We can do an entire week of papal symbolism. Look at the British crown jewels. Look at how many Roman symbols, and by Roman, I mean the pagan Luciferian symbols that have been adopted by the Catholic Church, none of which are Christian. And we've done large portions of shows just on the Maltese cross. The Maltese cross that was adopted and adapted by the Catholic Church, worn proudly by her Templar shock troops. And now to this very day, it's rare that you will see a clergyman, a little boy buggering Catholic priest, bishop, or cardinal anywhere without a Maltese cross on them. The Maltese cross is an ancient symbol of sun worship and has nothing to do with Christianity.
Oh, Johnny, and this I'm just going to highlight this really quickly. Like the Maltese cross symbolism is so deeply entrenched into our society that it's just like brilliantly hidden in plain sight. So, for instance, look at what's on my screen here. If you guys can see this, these are the highway signs in Ontario for the controlled access freeways. These are like our interstate systems in the province of Ontario, at least the 400 series highways. But you can see this right at the top. Every single 400 series highway logo has a Maltese cross on it, right at the top, and it's just kind of right. It's small, but it's there, like it's hidden right in plain sight. You can see this right here, and this is all over the place. I'm just going to show you here another Maltese cross and hidden in plain sight is the Ontario Provincial Police. You can see it. It's really small, but it's right there, right where I'm circling. So, this is all over the place. And, to deny its influence, it just becomes, I think, foolish.
It's there again in the flag that looks like a Netherlands flag underneath of it. That's a Maltese cross. That's an equidistant, basically an equidistant, more of a rectangular, but it's basically an equidistant cross, not a Christian cross.
Oh yeah, this would be the flag of England here. Yeah, you're right. And actually, England and with Elizabeth, just going back to the symbolism, I covered this in the video I did on her. It just proves that she's not a quote Protestant sovereign. Just on her stagecoach, on her when she was sworn in, this was in 1953. Queen Elizabeth II had the Roman imperial fasces on both sides of her stagecoach. Are you kidding me? And Queen Elizabeth was also related to the former Grand Master of the Knights of Malta, Andrew Bertie, first or second cousins. And when Elizabeth, she went to see the Pope. I have this newsreel on my channel. She went to see the Pope in 1963, and Pope John the 23rd announced that relations between England and the Vatican have never been closer. And you can see the English sovereign wearing the black dress, which is symbolic for submission to the Pope.
Yeah, they are so thoroughly controlled. England is so thoroughly controlled. They purposefully named that harpy Elizabeth II because they needed to pretend in some way, shape, or form that she drew her roots from the nominal Protestant Queen Elizabeth I. And it's absolutely no coincidence that the former Grand Master of the Knights of Malta, Uncle for whatever the clown's name, not too long ago, previous to the last, I think it's the previous to the current one, was a Brit.
Oh, yeah, that's yeah, he's also a Brit. Yeah, so and before that, Bertie was the first Brit in history to be the sovereign of the Knights of Malta, and that was in 1980. And since then, there's been another Brit festing.
Oh, you know what? Good for you.
And this all kind of ties in because we just saw recently Boris Johnson is the first Catholic to be sworn in, or baptized Catholic to be sworn in as prime minister in over 1,000 years of English history.
The first open Catholic. They now are comfortable. Yeah. They now are comfortable enough to do it openly because they're in their end game. That clown Tony Blair was a secret Catholic, but couldn't keep it to himself. Had to come out of the closet as soon as he was out of office.
Well, he had a very destructive. He passed I've been looking into the Terrorism Act that was signed by Tony Blair in 2006, and it's basically just a blueprint of the Patriot Act, which was drafted by Jesuit Professor Veit Din, and the Terrorism Act basically turned England into a police state.
We have to recall that Tony Blair was a frequent guest at Jeffrey Epstein's Orgy Island, where they trafficked in children to be raped by the rich and shameless. He's a good Catholic.
Well, actually, another one in the British connection, Conrad Black, who's currently in the House of Lords, Canadian-born British Catholic, Knight of St. Gregory the Great. He had over 26 entries on Epstein's Black Book list, and he was just given a pardon by Jesuit-trained Donald Trump for systemic money laundering at his company Hollinger International. And the Supreme Court changed the definition of bribery to get this papist knight Conrad Black off. So they're like, oh, now with their new definition of bribery, Conrad Black is innocent. Are you kidding me? What kind of who gets that type of support from the 6 open Catholics on the U.S. Supreme Court? The Protestant Neil Garouche went to Jesuit Georgetown Prep, so he might as well be the 7th Catholic. Are you kidding me?
Well, Gorsuch grew up Catholic. He's now Episcopalian, which is, as I mentioned before, the American version of the Anglican Church. So you're talking, what, 6 or 7 Catholics out of 9? And of course, something we've discussed before, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's late husband, Martian, was a professor at Georgetown. So that means at least 7 of the current 9 members of the U.S. Supreme Court have some sort of nexus with Rome. So they not only have a majority, they have a super majority.
Yeah, just you only need 5 votes to pass a motion. So all you need is 5, Jesuit puppets on the court, to truly subvert it. But they have 7 in the open.
They've got them all. You don't count those far left Jews. They're just papal court Jews. They own the entire Supreme Court. Everything is carefully scripted. Carefully scripted. They allow their frauds on the phony right to. It's just like Congress. They have their puppets that play the Pied Piper for all the conservatards, the Ron Pauls and the Rand Pauls and all those fraudulent clowns that supposedly are non-Catholic but send their kids to Jesuit school like Rand Paul. Carefully
McCarthy.
They know in advance what the votes are going to be. This tyrannical bill of mass crime is going to pass 53 to whatever 40 in the Senate and 3 abstain or whatever. And you puppets can be the part of the 40 that waste their vote pretending to be against the bill. It's all carefully scripted, all dog and pony show, all smoke and mirrors. What are you trying to say, George?
Oh, of course, there's Kevin McCarthy, who's a representative from California who sent, I believe you and Felipe talked about him over a year ago. He sent one of his kids to Georgetown Prep.
Yeah.
Kevin.
Go ahead. Keep going.
Kevin McCarthy is supposed to be a conservative, and he's supposed to be a Southern Baptist also. But he sent I believe he sent at least one of his kids to Georgetown Prep, the same school that Brett Kavanaugh and Gorsuch attended.
Yeah, I'm distracted because when you threw out,
guys, I confirm this. The tuition for Georgetown Prep is $60,000 a year. I just wanted to add that in. Like, think about how much money the Jesuits are fleecing from rich Catholics.
That's a college preparatory school, $60,000 a year before you even get into college. And the follow-on, it's not so much that the Jesuits are fleecing; it's that these criminal boy-raping Catholic scum who have invaded my country have that money to blow on a Jesuit prep school. That's the real problem.
And if you go to a place like Georgetown Preparatory School, it's pretty much a fait accompli. You're going to be on the Supreme Court. You're going to be a governor. You're going to be a senator.
Well, that's just it. You're buying your way into power. You're buying your way into Catholic power. And well done you, George, to mention that Gorsuch is a convert to Episcopalianism, which is nothing more than Catholic light, which is usually where the closet Catholic homosexuals go to become open homosexuals. They just transfer over to Episcopalian.
Well, like Pete Buttigieg. What's it, Buttigieg?
Right. He did it. That clown from, not clown, that boy raping scum from Seattle, the Seattle mayor, Murray, right? Ed Murray, did the same thing. Was a Jesuit seminarian and converted to Episcopalian so he could marry his butt-buggering buddy. And then they could legally adopt little boys and rape them. And then brag about how they'd never been brought up on charges.
Well, there's some serious connections between those two churches. Like, even Jeff Anderson, I think, is a shill, but he showed this case of this Catholic priest in Buffalo where there's like a rotten decay of sexual deviancy with the Catholic priest there. There was this Catholic priest last name Koloweski in Buffalo who became an Episcopal priest after he was a pedophile in Buffalo for 15 years. So there's some serious stuff going on. Pete Buttigieg, who converted to the Episcopal priest, his dad was trained to be a Jesuit. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, his dad,
Well,
Wittebig's dad, was like trained to be a Jesuit, who then like worked at Catholic Notre Dame University.
Oh wait, yes. He's from Malta. Buttigieg's father is from Malta.
Yeah, he's from Malta. Yeah, he studied. He probably did become a Jesuit. That's probably a smokescreen. Oh no, he left before he joined the priesthood.
Yes, he's perfect. He's archetypical. Because beyond that, we ask this question all the time. The question that never gets asked is, you've got a Maltese Jesuit for a father, likely ordained, but admitted seminarian, and his little boy is an open homosexual, far left, Luciferian. I mean, abortion right up to the baby pops out, and then kill the baby anyway and pretend it was still in the womb. Just a monster, just an absolute monster. The question is, how did he become a homosexual? He's got a Jesuit for a daddy. Was he being diddled as a little boy? It's certainly possible.
Well, I think Jeffrey Dahmer was his father, Lionel Dahmer, who was educated by the Jesuits at Marquette and who was a chemist. I believe he worked at P&G, some big chemical company. And they're like, how did Jeffrey Dahmer learn how to do all this chemistry stuff? He was pouring like acid in people's brains. He's trying to, you know what I mean? But there's lots of evidence out there that Dahmer was. I was watching a Netflix documentary on Dahmer. It was admitted that Jeffrey Dahmer's Jesuit-educated father would take Jeffrey out to kill animals outside. And he taught Jeffrey how to murder animals, which is always, that's what, that's like the first progressive step.
He was groomed. And before we leave Buffalo, I don't know if George's trying to jump in, but before we leave Buffalo, I just found this morning. This is from the Buffalo News. Now, unfortunately, because I'm not hosting, I can't put this, and I want to pull up an extra window where I should. It depends on how it affects my internet. But Buffalo News: marching orders kept Buffalo cops from arresting child molesting priests. A retired Buffalo cop, two of them, Vice Squad Detective Martin Harrington, admitted to the Catholic journalist in the Buffalo News that they were told not to arrest criminal priests. Now, this clown pretends that, these were priests that were whacking off in the park. We never came across the priests that were raping children. He's a lying piece of shit. The bottom line is, Buffalo Police Department unwritten regulation was priests were not arrested. This is admitted in the Buffalo News. Plug your ears. Are you fucking kidding me? Admitted priests were not arrested. To include, this explains. Now they tell you, this clown says, we never came across a child molesting priest. And then this papist who's writing the article admits that there were all of 3 Western New York priests who were arrested across 30 years. So clearly they were protecting the pedophile priests. So if you want to read some of this, hardly any of the more than 100 Buffalo area priests implicated as child molesters spent so much as 1 day in jail. Now pause right there. Every time you see a number, multiply that. Because if 100 priests have come to the surface, have the shit, the turds that they are, have bobbled up to the surface, there are many, many more who we still don't know about.
I'm saying, unfortunately, there's many victims who end up killing themselves, so they're never able to tell their story.
That's the worst case. Many just keep it to themselves. Many are afraid to. Many, their so-called statute of limitations runs out on them. For years, most of their victims were too scared or embarrassed from this article. Buffalo police had marching orders not to arrest Catholic priests, according to former Vice Squad Detective Martin Harrington and other retired officers. Notice, retired officers. Now they're safe. Now they have their pensions. Now these oath-breaking pieces of shit can come out and explain how they protected these scum. Instead, Instead, they alerted the bishop's office to any illegal activities. Are you fucking kidding me? Quote, the department's unwritten policy was that Catholic priests did not get arrested, end quote, said Harrington, who investigated vice crimes for 17 years and then retired in 1995. This piece of shit should be hanging by his balls in a cell, along with all the priests. And then he claims, well, I never had any experience with priests who molested children. Yeah, sure, you bastard, you piece of shit. Where do you draw the line? You admit that you are compromised. You admit that you're an oath-breaking criminal piece of shit. And then I'm supposed to believe you? You drew the line on child rapists? You piece of shit, you lying bastard? But we had priests who were caught with pornography or, pardon my language, jerking off in a city park. And our orders were to turn them over to the Buffalo Diocese. Are you kidding me? And they would deal with them, but they would not be arrested. Are you kidding me? The policy, listen. The Buffalo News, and I'll try to put these, when I repost this and on my channel, I'll have all these links. The policy, quote, only extended to Catholic priests, end quote, Harrington recalled. Wow. Quote, if we caught clergy from other religions, we arrested them, end quote. Let me read that again. The policy, quote, only extended to Catholic priests, end quote, Harrington recalled. Quote, if we caught clergy from other religions, we arrested them, end quote.
Wow. No, that's actually just, that's exactly how Peter J. Doiswick, an ex-Catholic priest, said it works way back in 1960. He said the police will hound the Protestant ministers for like the slightest scandal, but he said any scandal involving the Catholic priest will be buried to the best of their ability.
More on that. Harrington's recollection was echoed by former Vice Squad Lieutenant Martin Jurwitz, who was also a Catholic. When I joined the Vice Squad in 68, he said the department had just changed its policy on priests. You used to just let them go. Starting in 68, when you picked them up, then you had to call the bishop's office. Are you fucking kidding me? Are you kidding me? That was the big change. In 68, they changed it from catch and release to after that, oh, we had to alert the bishop and then release them. Are you kidding me? This is a major city. What's the population of Buffalo? Are you kidding me? The size and the population of Buffalo? How
it's big. Well, honestly, it's definitely over 1 million people, Johnny, like including all the suburbs. Definitely over 1 million.
Unbelievable. And why do I have to dig into the Buffalo News? Why is this not in the New York Slimes or the Washington Compost? Why is this not being? We know why. We know why. The Washington Compost, George, great job on Gorsuch. The Washington Compost, the papal court Jews of the Compost bragged that Gorsuch was finally the first Protestant on the Supreme Court. The piece of shit grew up Catholic. Hey, oh, by the way, he was also from the same, he went into becoming an Episcopalian in the same, whatever, diocese, whatever they call them, as the Ramsey family that sacrificed their little girl, John Benet. They're in the same, whatever, precinct, diocese, whatever those homosexual Episcopalians call themselves.
Oh,
so
very.
I'm sure that guy is not
Buffalo's a very. I'd say the Jesuits have control of Buffalo through Canisius College. That's actually where current Democrat DNC head Tom Perez attended. He went to the Jesuit school in Buffalo. And I know when Pope Francis came to America, he stopped by in Buffalo. He thought it was important enough to go to the Jesuit school there. And
that is a brilliant point that only we make. Nobody else. First of all, nobody else does what we do. Second of all, nobody else is mentioning that these papist schools. Let me pause. How is it possible in separation of church and state, secular United States, that the Catholic Church runs hospitals, schools, and orphanages? How is it possible in Ireland that the Irish pay taxes to the Irish government and the Irish government turns that money over to the fucking Catholic Church to run 90% of the schools? Are you kidding me? Give some of the stats you found, Eric, on how the United States government takes taxpayer money and hands it to Catholic charities, hands it to Catholic institutions to break the law for the illegals.
Oh, it's fascinating. Well, just through the 2018 annual report for Catholic Relief Services, this is just one Catholic organization like this. There's been numerous allegations also that Catholic Relief Services enables pedophilia to occur, and they cover up all the crimes that the priests engage in. But just last year, Catholic Relief Services got $700 million from the U.S. government in taxpayer dollars. That's just 1 year. So they average probably for the last 10 years, they've been averaging probably $600 million they've been receiving, every single year. So this runs into the billions and billions of dollars. And with the Catholic schools, I could speak here on Canada. Like, it's getting to the point, like, this is no exaggeration, Johnny and George. This is the town, London, Ontario, where I went to high school. This problem is just rampant there. But every single new school, I would say 95% of the new schools you come across where I'm living at in the province of Ontario are Catholic. 95%. That's not an exaggeration. 95% of the new schools are Catholic schools, but most of the public high schools are decaying. They're built in the 1950s. The public high school I went to, we had to share lockers because there wasn't enough space. It was over capacity. Almost all of the public schools in Ontario are at over capacity, while the Catholic schools are pretty much brand new. Just more intrigue with the donations. Yeah, but the government. You also have to look at massive multinational corporations, which at this point, the multinational corporations and the corporate government are, pretty much one and the same. But for instance, I found just through donations, through General Electric's report listing donations of over $10,000 in 2017, they gave like $3 million to various Catholic orphanages, schools, charities. They gave $50K to Boys Town, General Electric. Like, why is General Electric giving $50K to Boys Town where they're going to rape little boys there and girls?
And you wonder why.
So General Electric. I found this. They average about $3 million every single year that they give to the Catholic Church. Times that by the last 10 years, you start getting some big numbers. General Electric's just one company. Lockheed donates to the Catholic Church. All of them do. All of the multinationals do. That information, is all out there. And this is in every single country of the world. The Catholic Church has a tax exempt status. Throughout the entire world, they have diplomatic relations with 180 countries. So there's actually 180 countries that I just highlighted the example of the United States and Canada there. All the schools in Canada are taxpayer funded by non-Catholics. You have 180 countries, 180 governments which are subsidizing the Catholic Church, paying for their schools, giving them tax exempt status, giving them money for their relief services, their charities, etc. It's amazing, honestly, just the scope of it, and just start thinking about real estate values. Think about how, there's probably 10,000, probably 15,000 Catholic public schools, high schools, and colleges and universities throughout the United States. The average school now has a real estate value of like $20 million. So 20 million, 10,000, you start getting billions and billions, and how do you appraise the real estate value of the Catholic hospitals throughout the world? The hospitals probably appraised at like $100 million. Yeah, how do you start appraising the value of just the churches have real estate value? Churches, are worth tons and tons of money. Lots of times churches are on huge blocks of property. How do you start actually appraising how much all this stuff is worth? It runs again probably into the uncountable billions and billions of dollars.
Yeah. And you wonder how it is that Boys Town, a Catholic orphanage, was setting records. A Catholic orphanage 50 years ago was making more money than big business. Look at Charles Coughlin out of Detroit, from the Archdiocese of Detroit, where our buddy, the church militant, works. Charles Coughlin setting records, making millions of dollars a year as a friggin' Catholic priest on the radio railing against Jews.
Crazy. He would tell people to they would get envelopes every week from all his followers. And he would say, just put like $1 in, and people would put more than $1 in. And he was getting thousands and thousands of these. And the documentary, the PBS documentary, even outs Coughlin for having his own account at Payne and Weber, one of the big American banks. So he was, fleecing his followers. So he was taking the money that he was getting and then just investing it into stocks and shares for himself. Like, you know, he made millions and millions. Like, you know, he had industrialists giving him money too. Like, how can you even quantify that? Like, the head of DuPont, the DuPont treasurer was a Knight of Malta, Knight of St. Gregory the Great, John J. Raskob. You know, Raskob, like, just, and that's another way. How do you quantify like these rich philanthropists who give millions and millions to the church? Like, Raskob gave, I think it was at the time $1 million to the Wilmington, Delaware Archdiocese. That would be about 20 million today. Nicholas Frederick Brady gave, I think, 3 million to the Jesuits in 1930. Nicholas Frederick Brady was the chairman of over 50 corporations. He was a Supreme Order of Christ. That's the highest papal order. It's not in existence anymore. Brady was also a Knight of Malta, Knight of St. Gregory, and he personally financed the Jesuit novitiate in Wernersville. And his wife gave the Brady mansion called Innisfada, this huge mansion in New York, probably appraised, you know, at least like $50 million. This Duchess just gifted this mansion to the Jesuits. It's like, yo, here you are.
Yeah, Brady's one of the worst.
How do you start quantifying all these gifts that they get from the Catholic aristocratic class? Like,
and this is how they have billions of dollars, probably trillions, to suddenly seem like they're falling on their sword to buy off the millions of children, now adults, that they raped. So we're supposed to feel bad, and we're supposed to see all these dioceses that are going into bankruptcy. Meanwhile, it's just barely the tip of the iceberg. So real quick on the chat, I don't want to open up another window. I don't want to open up a YouTube because I might have problems with my audio and video, but I want to mention everybody in the chat. So look, if you're in the chat, if you can make a comment that's related to what we're talking about, then there's an excellent chance that we can address it. Don't throw a curveball and put us on another topic because we have too many topics as it is. For instance, Jeremy. Samaritan, good to see you. Samaritan loves George. Kat, good to see you. Cuz, hey, great to see you. And D-Boy. And let's see here. Joe, good to see you. And, Epstein's mother. That's not good. Francis,
actually, I should have brought this. I'm bringing this up at some point today. Just with Epstein, just more proof of the diabolical Jesuit cover-up of the Jeffrey Epstein case. There is a new appointment to head the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The appointment was made August 19th, 2019, 9 days after Epstein was dead. But her name is Kathleen Hawk Sawyer. She went to Welling Jesuit College. And she was Bill Clinton's Federal Bureau of Prison head from 1992 to 2001, when Bill Clinton, Jesuit trained, passed the crime bill in 1994, which has exponentially put more Americans in prison while protecting his pedophile buddies at the top. But Kathleen Hawk Sawyer, that is educated by Jesuits, and Catholic Bill Barr made a press conference. I covered this on the video. I did about a 6-minute video on this. Catholic Bill Barr announced that we're doing a shakeup here at the Federal Bureau of Prisons. He's going to get the Jesuit-trained Kathleen Hawk Sawyer and to, figure out what happened to Jesuit.
All right, let's recap that. That's just a huge story. I mean, we can keep going back and back and back in time and just recap these entire outrages. I don't want to go too far back because we'll spend too much time on it. Let's just do the recent, okay? We all know who Jeffrey Epstein was, a papal court Jew, a middleman, a sacrificial Jew that they kicked to the curb. There's already, I'm sure, several who have stepped up and are distributing children to these scum to be raped ongoing. He's just an expendable Jew. He was a nobody at Dalton, a math teacher at Dalton, an expensive private school, where Barr's daddy was the headmaster and also a Jew, a converso Jew, who became a Roman Catholic. Just happened to be a headmaster, and I believe at the same damn time. So they found this deviant pervert, nobody, mathematician, Epstein at Dalton, and just magically, he's a Wall Street wizard. Suddenly he's making billions of dollars, buys his own island, and he's facilitating this for the rich and shameless. Do we go into the Alexander Acosta outrage? This piece of shit that was our Secretary of Labor, that the pedophile president who loves Jeffrey Epstein, how it is that there's no fallout against this piece of shit, how it is that he's not hanging by his balls, because it's all corrupt. It's all corrupt.
Oh, and actually, just the Catholic connection. Acosta, I believe he's a Cuban Catholic because I saw him speaking after he gave Epstein his softball deal. He gave a long talk at the Catholic University of America. The talk was something on the lines like, "How do you what's your morality like as a lawyer?" Pretty huge, but this just shows like the full total Catholic control. So like how like Acosta, he was forced to step down type of thing. But like who replaced him? The current acting United States Secretary of Labor, Patrick
committed
Pizzella.
crimes. What did he? Where is he being charged for committing crimes? He aided and abetted criminal activity. That piece of shit.
It's nowhere, and this is why I think the ultimately Vatican stick it like in our faces. Like this cements it. So after Acosta, like he's just basically gets away scot-free for giving this deal of a century to Epstein, and the guy who then is taking over the Secretary of Labor, Patrick Pizzella, is a devout Catholic who went to the Roman Catholic Iona Preparatory School in New York. That's like an elite Catholic boarding school.
Yeah.
So we get rid of Acosta. Now we just have a guy who's even more of a devout Catholic than he is.
It goes all the way back. It goes back to what you're talking about. So Epstein, this facilitator, is in federal prison, and he's on suicide watch. He makes an attempt to take his own life and fails, and several days later makes another attempt and succeeds. And the only negative aspect, you've got how many tens of officials involved. You've got guards involved. You've got officers involved. You've got prison officials. You've got the warden involved. Each and every one of them are culpable in some degree. Not a single one of them is affected. And this piece of shit Barr ousts the female who runs the entire operation so that they can make room for a Jesuit-trained papist female to step in. And I'm supposed to think that justice has been served? Because I'm that stupid. George, where are you? George, I know you've got a ridiculous amount of information. We've been going for 45 minutes. You need to get some of that.
Oh, great point, Johnny. Before you jump in, Johnny, just to hammer your last point, that's how, like in your face, like the Jesuits are with this. Like that's how they view humanity. Like they say, shut up, like, zip your mouth. We're going to tell you how to think. Just, go back to sleep. Oh. And just by the appointment of Kathleen Hawk Sawyer, like literally she's Jesuit trained. Like Bill Clinton, who was on the Epstein list, like he was documented going on the Lolita Express Epstein's plane like 25 times, made Kathleen Hawk Sawyer, I think he gave her a presidential medal of freedom even in like 1998. Like, are you kidding me? Like this is right, in your face. Like, and to deny like that this is, Jesuit intrigue is just, just stupid. Because Kathleen Hawk Sawyer went to Wheeling Jesuit College. That's the same college, I think, where Kathy O'Brien also did the Mind Control Center in her book Transformation.
Oh, great point.
But do you want to jump in there, George?
Well, yes. Okay, so Johnny and Eric, what would you like me to address?
Are you kidding me? You've been calling me every other day with all this information. Don't you have stuff that you got that's burning to get out? Come on. Okay, and I just I'd like to apologize for inundating you with some stuff without proper context. I sent you some stuff about the mayor of Tulsa and the mayor of Austin, Texas, and I didn't give you any proper context on that. But maybe I should talk to you about that off the show. I've come across a number of things. I just recently finished a book called Hi Hitler by Gabriel Rosenfeld, who is a professor at Fairfield University in Connecticut, which is an SJ school. And I was at my local library recently, and the title caught my attention. And the subtitle is how, in the last 70 plus years, how Hitler and the Nazis have become mainstream and normalized and almost a comical figure. For example, people will often use the term Nazi as a put down, as like soup Nazi, grammar, feminazi, so forth. And the book came out in 2015. So this was 70 years after World War II, and the
alleged death of Adolf Hitler. And I say alleged death. Now, as I said, the author of this book, Rosenfeld, is a history professor at Fairfield University. And this is something I don't think we've addressed at length, Eric or Johnny, is how many papal court public Jews has Rome put out, since 1945, to put a positive spin on the Holocaust, to identify Rome from her involvement from it.
Yes, George, let me accent your point, if you would let me, please. I want to recommend again our friend Professor Walter Weitz. I think the definitive explanation, because this is coming up in the chat, the definitive explanation of who are Jews and where do they fit in his documentary, I guess, not documentary, but his instructional. The title of it is The King of the North Part 2. The King of the North Part 2, where he explains brilliantly how it has always been an agenda of the Catholic Church to resurrect the nation of Israel as a distraction, as a major distraction. And in particular, I apologize to you non-Christians, but one of the most important reasons for the Catholic Church to do this is to erase herself from the Bible. Because you get Christians focused on Israel losing sight of how Rome is the fourth and final beast, the whore of Babylon, the great harlot drunk on the blood of the saints. And he traces back to at least 1798 and Napoleon Bonaparte, who was almost assuredly mentored and raised by Jesuits in Corsica. Why do I say that? Because the Jesuits were suppressed in France in 1773. And where did they run to? They ran to the island of Corsica, where Napoleon was a little boy growing up. And he also had a Roman Catholic priest, Abbot Joseph Sias, who was his counselor, mentor, probably his confessor, whispering in his ear the entire time, had a proclamation in 1798 to reconstitute the nation of Israel. It just didn't work because he lost the Battle of Acre. This has always been a Vatican agenda, and the Third Reich, which was entirely created by the Catholic Church, bankrolled by Franz von Papen, on and on. Mein Kampf was written by Jesuit Bernard Stammfel for Hitler, on and on and on.
Oh, yeah. Hitler from a Catholic country. He wasn't even from Germany. He's from Catholic Austria.
Right, Austria. He was from a very Catholic location, the same way that Jew Karl Marx was from a tiny island of Catholicism in Trier, in a sea of Protestant Germans. So the Holocaust, there absolutely was something of substance of the Holocaust. Now, I don't know about the numbers, but they had to have the Holocaust be real so they could force Jews into this phony, reconstituted nation that they had just created. Yes, there absolutely is something to the idea that there are a bunch of Jews who were never really Jews. Well, then how do you call a Jew a Jew? Is it bloodline? Is it name? Is it the size of their nose? It doesn't fucking matter, pardon my language. But there were Russian Jews that were created and pushed into this new nation. And for the truth on this, not the racist, emotional stupidity, the truth on this, I highly recommend Professor Weitz, King of the North Part 2, lecture is what the word I was looking for, where he goes far beyond what the papists, Catholics like to stir people up in their racism and their stupidity on this.
Well, and Johnny, just that they're doing a lot of that with the Jews. I think possibly like a move for having all the Jews in one place in Israel would make it easier to eliminate them one day.
You bet.
Need be. Just because I found there's just some interesting, the Council for American Islamic Relations, I think tank that was created in the United States with Saudi and Vatican money in the late 90s. The founder, Omar Ahmad, has 2 master's degrees from Jesuit Santa Clara. But recently, in 2018, the Council for American Islamic Relations put out a press release saying that we won't rest until every single Jew is exterminated off this planet. So like they're calling for the annihilation of Jews. I linked this story in the chat. There is actually, and this shows more. This kind of shows Vatican racism, Vatican racism and Vatican financial intrigue, because this article is called "Expansion of Vatican-Owned East Jerusalem Hotel Stalled Over Anti-Semitism Claims." But the Vatican owns this. I wasn't aware of this. They own this massive hotel called the Notre Dame Center Hotel in East Jerusalem, and this thing looks massive. Like the architecture is very like Renaissance-esque. Like this thing has to be worth, could be worth almost like $100 million. Just looking at the photo in this article, but there's been some claims that the Catholic owners of this hotel are making statements. Like the claims are like they hate Jews. They're making many anti-Semitic statements. Which if you look into like the Jesuit magazine, the Civica Catholica. Adolf Hitler actually credited the Jesuit magazine for his racial views.
Yes, Stanford was writing articles for that magazine before he wrote Mein Kampf. He was an arch anti-Semite, the Jesuit Bernard Stanford, who wrote Mein Kampf for him.
Oh, absolutely. And like that magazine, like I think was that if you trace it, that's actually like in terms of like the modern resurrection of the anti-Semitic movement, it dates back to the Jesuit, the Civica Catholica magazine. That magazine had a huge part to play in the Dreyfus affair in France, which they framed Captain Alfred Dreyfus for selling French military secrets to the Germans, when in fact it was Count Esterhazy, a devout French Catholic, who was actually like he went into like the papal Zouaves a few years before he framed the Jew Dreyfus for the Dreyfus affair. But the Jesuits used the Dreyfus affair, to completely, basically crush the French Republic and reinstate the Catholic Church in France as it used to be in the 1800s. And just another interesting Jewish connection I found here, just with the Vatican intrigue and Zionism, because we know Donald Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem. And I just found this name here, Leslie Meredith Sue of Virginia. This is quoting from the White House Gov press release, was to be on June 18th, 2019, was to become the ambassador extraordinaire to the Sultanate of Oman. But it says here, Jesuit trained at Georgetown, Leslie Meredith Sue was the deputy chief of mission at the U.S. mission in Israel and is the first deputy chief of mission of the U.S. embassy in Jerusalem. And Leslie Meredith Sue went to Jesuit Georgetown. So you have the first deputy chief of mission at the new U.S. embassy there in Jerusalem went to Georgetown, which, I think is just, shows that everything is right on plan. Like the guy who's in charge of JINSA, the Jewish Institute of National Security in America, one of the biggest Jewish think tanks in America that a lot of shills point to, saying that the Zionists are taking over the U.S. David P. Steinem, the CEO chairman of JINSA, also went to Jesuit Georgetown University.
Yeah, they use one event, one tragedy, supposedly they will fake you out with one event, only to make room for more of their agenda. George, I didn't mean to actually stop you and cut you off. I just wanted to highlight your point, and I ended up hijacking your time. Can you pick up where you left off?
Well, yes. Thank you for yielding the floor back to me. Anyhow, one of the major figures of the 20th and 21st century of the Holocaust movement was Elie Wiesel. He wrote dozens of books. He lived from 1928 to 2016, and he was considered your go-to guy when it came to the subject of the Holocaust. He was from Romania, and he survived the concentration camp in Auschwitz. And as I said, he wrote dozens of tomes on the subject. Well, turns out there's a reason why he was so popular, because he received numerous honorary degrees. One was from DePaul, another one was from Seton Hall in 1998, and another one was received a third one from Cabrini College in Pennsylvania. So he received at least 3 honorary degrees from Catholic institutions. Now, I know we've talked about this before. An honorary degree doesn't carry quite the same weight as, say, an actual one or something like that. But I think he was being recognized for his years of service, for his services rendered. So, I've actually heard Basil speak before, and I've read some of his books, and he talked about how bad the Holocaust was, and how vicious, and how it was demonic and satanic and things like that. Even though he uses language like that, even though he's a professed atheist, he basically said in one of his works, if there is a devil, he was the obvious architect of the Holocaust. And so, however, in all of his works, he never mentions the Vatican. He never mentions the Jesuits. He never mentions certain details that we've just brought up, like Franz von Papen or Stompel or anything like that. Or, as Eric has mentioned past, Hermann Buckermann, one of Hitler's scientific advisors. So he just basically, so if you just read or listen to Eli Wiesel, you got the impression that, yes, the Holocaust was a bad thing, and it was just carried out by those wicked, evil Germans who hate Jews.
Yeah, and I don't want to spin too much on this, and I'll go back to your honorary degree issue. It's worth noting, absolutely is worth noting, when a Catholic or a Jesuit institution bestows an honorary degree. For instance, I've talked about this with you on the phone. The fact that the guy that was responsible for AIDS got the Sword of Loyola that Eric found, that's huge. I mean, that's the Jesuits saying, hey, thanks for slaughtering millions secretly with virus and so forth. It's basically just what you said, George. It's a Catholic or Jesuit institution saying, job well done.
Well, absolutely. And Johnny, just on the Sword of Loyola, this is really just quickly, it's important to note, like you said, they gave Gallo his sword after he engineered the AIDS virus. And just the timing is key, because J. Edgar Hoover got his Sword of Loyola only 1 year after John F. Kennedy was murdered, presumably by the Jesuits. So the Jesuits are saying, because J. Edgar Hoover, like, there's been, his name, like, I know that there's, out of all the books that have been written on the Kennedy assassination, like, even J. Edgar Hoover is, in those books. As they don't mention the Sword of Loyola, of course, but they mention how Hoover was covering it up. So the Jesuits gave him a sword just 1 year after the Kennedy death, doubtlessly for good job, Jay, for covering it up.
A brilliant point. I think it's a brilliant point. That's the kind of information where some kind of an honorary something is important. The timing to say, hey, you're not an overt Catholic. You weren't baptized, but you're one of ours, and we really appreciate the work you're doing for us.
Oh, another one, a great one with the Nazis. Alan Ryan drafted the official government report on the CIA and U.S. State Department involvement with Klaus Barbie, the Nazi. And he's like, oh, no, the CIA wasn't involved with Klaus Barbie at all. And the Vatican wasn't involved with him either. So after he drafts this report, I don't believe Alan Ryan, with his last name Ryan, if he could have been Catholic, but Alan Ryan became a professor at Jesuit Boston College after whitewashing the official government report, saying there was no connection from the Nazi Klaus Barbie to the Central Intelligence Agency, more known as Catholics in Action, the Cocaine Importation Agency, or Capitalism's Invisible Army. And there's no mention of Krunoslav Draganovich, the Jesuit-educated chaplain of the Ustashi Jasenovic concentration camp, who is key in Paperclip. Like, the Ustashi Catholic priest Draganovich was actually the one who brought Klaus Barbie over to South America, but there's no mention of that in the Alan Ryan report, and he became literally a professor at Jesuit Boston College after this whitewash.
Well, that's no different than Edmund Walsh, Jesuit priest Edmund Walsh, being at Nuremberg and being personally involved in the United States government operations of translating and so forth, to carefully edit and screen out the testimony of the Nazis to make sure that the Catholic Church and all their traitorous piece of shit agents were screened from the Nazi testimony there. Wasn't Ledakowski at Nuremberg also the Superior General?
Oh, that'd be fascinating if it was. Was he? Do you know about that, George?
No, he died in 1942, so he would have died. That was like 4 or 5 years before or after his death.
Okay, well, I know a couple attorneys at Nuremberg officially representing the U.S. had Jesuit ties. Both they were the Donovans. I don't think they're related, but there's James Donovan, Jesuit educated at Fordham. He was at Nuremberg. He would later be the negotiator between the U.S. and Fidel Castro. He actually flew down to Cuba to give Fidel the $2 million ransom, which was, and this is in the book, but The Bay of Pigs by Haynes Johnson. I'll link this in the post. But $1 million of the $2 million that the U.S. government gave to Fidel actually came from Cardinal Cushing. Interestingly, yeah. But what was I saying here? So James Donovan was he gave $2 million to Castro, and then it was Jesuit trained James Donovan who did the Gary Francis Powers U-2 spy plane negotiations, which was Jesuit theater to extend the Cold War. And then they even made the movie about that with Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks playing Jesuit-trained James Donovan. But he went to Fordham. He was officially at Nuremberg. And there was also Wild Bill William Donovan, devout Roman Catholic, Knight of Malta, Knight of St. Sylvester, head of the Office of Strategic Services. And he was a lawyer at Nuremberg.
Yeah, absolutely insider treason. All that was insider treason in the same way that Robert Philip Hansen, devout Roman Catholic, Opus Dei Roman Catholic, was allowed and screened to give information, give intelligence to the Soviet Union for 20 years before Jesuit-trained Eric O'Neill was finally used to bring him in, because you had Opus Dei Louis Freeh running the Federal Bureau of Inquisition at the time. The Powers thing was completely engineered. As a matter of fact, there's suspicion that Lee Harvey Oswald, working for the CIA, brought with him the intelligence that allowed the Soviets to shoot down a U-2 that they weren't able to do before then.
Oh wow! Yeah, because I'm pretty sure his topic when Lee Harvey Oswald, just when he went to the Jesuit college and spoke there, what was it, like 4 weeks before Kennedy was slaughtered? Lee Harvey Oswald spoke at the Jesuit Spring Hill College in Alabama on the topic of the Soviet Union, which is interesting.
Yeah, so
it all kind of ties in.
All the more reason why he had to be sacrificed when he got back. Because
his brother he had a brother who was a Jesuit, Eugene Murrett. Emmanuel Josephson was the earliest source I've seen making this accusation.
Okay.
But the National Catholic Register even did an article about it. So that's just perfect, to have Oswald. As you said, he was the perfect patsy. He admitted it himself. The Dallas Police Department.
Good for you. George, you try and jump in?
Well, yes, if I could just finish up on the whole paper court puppet Jews putting a positive spin on the Holocaust. I came across, when I read the Rosenfeld book, Hi Hitler, one of the names I came across was a history professor named Michael Berenbaum, who was born in 1945. He's taught at several different schools, one of which was or has been Georgetown. I guess he's a visiting professor there. And Berenbaum is considered to be basically the academic version of Elie Wiesel. He's written numerous scholarly works on the Holocaust, Holocaust denial, neo-Nazis, the rise of fascism in the 1930s in Europe, the reemergence of fascism in Europe in the 21st century, things like that. So, as I said, Berenbaum is taught at Georgetown. So, in the last 70, 75 years, as I just said a moment ago or a few minutes ago, that Rome has put a spin, has worked her level best to put a positive spin on the Holocaust. So she'll play one or two games. She'll have people say, no, the Holocaust never happened, or maybe happened, but only a few thousand people died. Or yes, it did happen, but it was just the Germans. It was just those wicked, evil Nazis who did it. They're solely to blame. We don't know where the Nazis came from. They just popped up. They must have popped up out of the ground to orchestrate things like Auschwitz and Treblinka and Bergen-Belsen. And it was just purely the Nazis. The Vatican, the Jesuits had absolutely nothing to do with it whatsoever. Well, okay, maybe a few did, but there were rogue elements. So, therefore, all you have to do is just so you can hold one of two positions. One, as I said, the Holocaust did not happen, or two, it was just the Germans who were responsible for it.
Sure, Judge. I don't want to follow up with the Holocaust because I don't have anything on it just yet, but I can make a connection with more Jews and being owned by the Catholic Church as puppets of the Catholic Church. We talked about this one or two briefs ago. Barack Obama and his connection to the Catholic Church when SR-71 Teddy Hesburgh commanded him as a sitting president to give the commencement address in 2009 in Notre Dame. And he basically said that Chicago Cardinal Joseph Bernardin convinced him to become a Roman Catholic. So I have this from the Militant and one of his devout Roman Catholic sources at the secular American Spectator, connecting Bernardine to Obama. And he actually mentions how it was Bernardine. Now, we showed these documents. I gave them to Eric, and Eric put them on his screen. How the Catholic Church paid for Barack Obama to get radical communist leftist training from Saul Alinsky. The Catholic Church paid for Barack Obama to fly to California to be trained by far-left Jew Saul Alinsky. This is no different than ex-Jesuit Greg Galuzzo naming his communist community organizing enterprise the Gamaliel Foundation, after the famous rabbi that taught the Apostle Paul. Really? So should we go into how many Jesuits have pretended to be Jews as they enact their skullduggery?
That'd be an interesting conversation. Karl Marx just comes to mind, for one of them. Karl Marx, I think, a lot of people, I shouldn't say famously because a lot of people don't know this. This was quoted in the book Marx and Satan. I forget the author's name, but the book's called Marx and Satan. You can find a PDF of it on the internet. But Marx actually said that behind every pope stands a Jesuit. And Marx was educated by Jesuits, and that book actually shows that Marx was a vicious anti-Semite while being supposedly a Jew. So you can see how that operates, very well for the Jesuits. Because that would, millions would be confused by that. Why is Karl Marx, bashing Jews if he's Jewish? There must be something to the Zionist plot of Karl Marx. He's talking about it. And I just want to go back to George's point. I'll link this. I found it a source. This is from the book God and the Fascists: The Vatican Alliance with Mussolini and Franco. But this kind of just goes into, this fills the void, I think, fills the void of what the historians George mentioned don't mention, the connecting the Vatican and the Catholic Church to the Nazi Third Reich. And I know, George, we talked about this book. This was another Jewish author, was Josephson, who wrote the Operation Paperclip book. What was her first name?
Yes.
And Jacobson?
Well, I'm not sure what her background is. She could be Jewish, but
I assumed with the last name she was Jewish, but that book was a whitewash, no connection between the Vatican and the Catholic Church and Operation Paperclip. So you say it's a real agenda, but this book here, God and the Fascists by Karl-Heinz Deichner, was written in 1965, and it's a good history book. But he says here, the Catholic military prayer and songbook compiled by the Wehrmacht field bishop in 1940 also brought the Virgin Mary into intimate connection with Hitler's battles. Quote, "Oh, bless us in dispute, Mary, our Queen, blessed one, Mary, our Queen, you reign in the glory of victory, give us victory in our dispute, in a life laurel wreath, and death beatitude, in the thunder of the cannon, Mary, our Queen, give us the crowns of victory." And I'll just read another 30 seconds of this. This Karl-Heinz Deichner continues, "Furthermore, the Catholic military prayer and songbook, approved by the bishops, instructed the German soldiers, quote, Military service is a service of honor. The Army has a lot to be thanked for in terms of making Germany great. It is a school of bravery, the birthplace of great heroes, a theater of honor and glory. Keep to the motto, with God for Führer, people, and fatherland. Let us pray. Let us be a heroic breed. Bless, in particular, our Führer and Commander-in-Chief of the Wehrmacht and all of the tasks that are set before him. Let us all see a holy task and our sacrifice for the people and fatherland under his leadership, end quote, and so on and so forth. And then this Deichner says here, Cardinal Bertram. This was a key cardinal during the Third Reich. This Cardinal Bertram, he's the Cardinal of Berlin. Cardinal Bertram sent Hitler, quote, the warmest wishes in the name of the episcopate for his birthday on April 20, 1940. After the quick defeat of France, the bishops praised the Wehrmacht exuberantly, and once again they let the church bells ring and the flags fly for a week. At the German Catholic churches. That's just an excerpt that shows that, you know, the Catholic Church in the Third Reich were, you know, pretty much one and the same. And I'll link that book written by this guy was a German, Karl-Heinz Deichner, the author there.
Hey, real quick, two issues that I want to mention, and to follow on what you're saying, Eric. But I'll pause right now because Smirdan had a great question. On a positive note, they're asking where Doc and Hawkeye are. On a positive note, we've had a lot of volunteers come and go for a lot of crazy different reasons. And the good news is that we're still in touch with both Doc and Hawkeye. Doc is just being pulled in by being a successful doc. I mean, he really is a doctor. He's got a doctorate of engineering, and he's got a growing family, and he's just had to kind of step away. But he's still involved and wants to get more involved. Hawkeye has had some technical issues. It had to, he's lost his computer. He recently did a blog that I'm going to put in the notes, a crazy blog on this Hawkeye at his best on, let's see here, getting into entertainment and numbers and dates and X-Men and Matrix. Just fantastic.
Oh, yeah, Hawk's great for that stuff. Actually, I should send it. I don't know if you've seen it. I should send him the thing I found about the movie Law Abiding Citizen. I'm sure he would. Yeah, he'd love that. But I want to encourage him. He has not really been able to do too much with us on the streaming. We'd love to have him back as soon as he can get back. But in the meantime, he has been writing on his blog, and I'll put this in the chat and also in our notes. Real quick. Papists pretending to be Jews. There are a couple of really famous examples. The occultist, black magic, magician, whatever, Eliphas Levi, who supposedly is the one that created the Baphomet, is a former Roman Catholic seminarian, Alphonse Louis Constant. Okay, there's one example. Even worse, the Jesuit who fabricated doctrines of futurism, dispensationalism. I think he was also involved in the rapture. Manuel de la Cunza, I think he was a Spanish Jesuit, wrote his Christian heresies as Rabbi Juan Jehoshaphat ben Ezra. Okay, so here's a couple of great examples. Another is that's a powerful example right there. That's a fourth. That guy's probably a third or fourth vow ordained Jesuit too.
Okay,
and that shows that just to hammer this point in the Jesuit oath, it does say that they'll descend so low as to be a Jew amongst Jews. So I guess that last fact you pointed out shows that they do live out the words of their oath. They do go in disguise as Jews.
Go ahead, George.
Okay, I would like to address that subject of Jesuits feigning to be Jews. However, can we just back up for a second? Because I had to step out for a moment. Eric was talking about the 2009 film, Law Abiding Citizen, and something he shared a few days ago was there was a line in the movie where Jamie Foxx's character, he plays a lawyer. He's a prosecutor. And turns out something that Eric mentioned is that his character went to Fordham. And not only did he go to Fordham, he became an expert in torture, which is something that he does to Gerard Butler's character in the movie. Gerard Butler, the Catholic Scotsman in real life. So I decided to go look. I've actually seen the film before, but it was quite a while ago, so I've forgotten a number of the details. Well, the film also, in addition to starring Gerard Butler and Jamie Foxx, there are a number of supporting actors and actresses. One of whom is Leslie Bibb. I guess she played, if I'm not mistaken, she played Gerard Butler's wife. Bibb went to St. Gertrude's High School, which is a Catholic school, obviously, in Virginia. Also, one of the other supporting actresses was Regina Regina Hall. She played, I guess she's like one of the assistant prosecutors, if I'm not mistaken. Well,
Oh, is she the blonde woman in the movie?
Bibb was the blonde. I believe she played. I believe she played Butler's wife, if I'm not mistaken. And Regina Hall, who I guess is like one of the assistant district attorneys, she got her undergrad degree at Fordham in real life.
Oh wow, so it all ties in. And George, just keep going. But I'm just I linked the post I did. I'll just read the exact dialogue. It comes at the 4:40-minute mark of the movie, but it's Jamie Foxx's character's named Nick Rice. He said he goes to Jesuit Fordham, and he's talking to another lawyer, Bruce McGill, or no, the lawyer played by Bruce McGill. His character's named Jonas Cantrell. Cantrell says, "You're still torturing in Brigham," and then Rice says, and you mentioned how Rice, he is kind of like a torture expert in the movie. Rice, who goes to Fordham. Then Jamie Foxx's character, Nick Rice, says, "Let's just say I'm impressed with his Harvard. More impressed. He says, let's just say I'm less impressed with his Harvard degree than he is." Cantrell says, "Then, well, we can't have all gone to Fordham, having the Jesuit school." And then Nick Rice says, "I went to Fordham Night School. You know what I learned in Fordham Night School? Law school's got nothing to do with law." That's the quote. But that's a pretty just in your face Jesuit theater. And do you have any? And it's great information with the actors, so you can see like how all the actors, or there's actors and actresses in the movie affiliated with Fordham. Gerard Butler, like the main character, you mentioned is Catholic, and and how like, and this is another question, like how many movies like this are there just like subtle references like this? Like another movie, it's kind of a similar related movie was I watched was The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. That starred Denzel Washington, who went to Jesuit Fordham. But in that movie, like it's about John Travolta. I don't know if John Travolta is Catholic, but his character is a Catholic in the movie. He kind of makes a big deal of it. And he talks about confession in the movie, even. But it's kind of like he's like John Travolta's character. Like it kind of takes over the subway car in New York. Like has a bunch of people hostage, and he demands $1 million from the mayor. And he's talking to Denzel Washington, who's the subway operator. But all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, like John Travolta's character, I guess who was playing like the quote terrorist in the movie, he just says like, "Yeah, like I'm a devout Catholic."
John Travolta grew up Roman Catholic. He was Italian on his dad's side, or he is Italian on his dad's side, and Irish on his mom's side. And as an adult, he became a member of the Church of Scientology, which is. I'm not an expert on this. L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of it, during World War II, was Office of Naval Intelligence.
Hey, this conversation reminds me of another papist piece of shit inquisitor, Dan Mitrione, and his buddy Jim Jones. Dan Mitrione, who's an FBI agent who specialized in torture.
Well, I've seen there's did I send you the obituary on the New York Times? There's a Catholic priest who praised him as a godly man, like a hero.
Absolute great guy, absolute monster. They would practice by grabbing homeless people off the street and torturing them to death. Real great guy and a good buddy of Jim Jones.
He was the police chief in where was that in Indiana, where Jones grew up and was Jones was disguised as the Protestant minister there, but he had Catholic Mitrione as his police chief to protect him.
police chief, FBI agent with connections to the Central Intelligence Agency.
It was probably Mitrione because Jim Jones got a meeting with Jesuit Fidel Castro. I think that was in 1963. So how did he pull that off? The CIA connections. Fidel Castro.
Probably the same way he had a meeting with Jesuit Governor Moonbeam, the once and future governor of California.
Oh, absolutely. According to spiritualsmart.com, it was actually Governor Jesuit seminarian Jerry Moonbeam Brown who closed the People's Temple records.
We don't want you looking at that, George. Go ahead.
Okay, we're talking about torture and murder. Somebody whom we talked about over years ago was Richard Kapusky, the Iceman. He's a famous killer, 1970s, 1980s in New York, and he was a contract killer for the mafia. Now, as I said, he was a contract killer because since he was of a Polish background, he couldn't be a member of the mafia. He was an associate. Devout Roman Catholic, was actually an altar boy. But speaking of which, he was notorious for his creative ways of killing his victims, and I won't elaborate. However, one of the things you do is, this is actually in the tome, The Iceman. I forgot the name of the author. Is what Kapusky would do is go around New York and find transients who are passed out and practice his techniques on them. And that reminded me of Mitrione.
No, it seems similar, the same cold-hearted brutality. And I linked this in the chat. I mentioned how did Jim Jones get his meeting with the literal Jesuit Fidel Castro down in Cuba, but the CIA through Mitrione probably had a part to do with that. And if you guys remember, The Guardian, I first saw this in Abra Manhattan's 1967 book, Catholic Power Today, but Fidel's sister was a CIA agent. Would you imagine that? But I linked that in the chat. But that's kind of you wouldn't think that because supposedly the CIA tried to assassinate him 600 times. But it's Juanita Castro. She's a CIA agent. Apparently, she even talks about it in a recent memoir book she wrote in 2009. But Aber Manhattan made that accusation back in the 60s. That Fidel's sister is a CIA agent, and it's kind of crazy. And I think it's just more proof that Jim Jones was a Jesuit. Alberto Rivera made the claim. There's an executive intelligence review article that also says that the Jesuits were behind Georgetown, but I think it validates that Jim Jones was a Jesuit, and that's why when they we've said this before, but this is a very important point. This is saying cameras at home when they had the press conference down in Guyana, the Jesuits sent John Moscatelli of the U.S. Air Force to give the press conference, saying that they found bodies buried under other bodies in Guyana. And John Moscatelli went to Jesuit St. Joseph's University. They went to the Jesuit St. Joseph's in Philly, and then Moscatelli then got a promotion within the Air Force after this press conference. But by him doing that, though, by saying there's more bodies buried under other bodies, it delayed. What it did was it ensured that the bodies would not be flown back to the United States to be properly investigated. And they just ended up rotting in the Guyana heat for 3 weeks.
And what's the name of the capital of British Guyana? It's British Guyana that's the capital.
None other than Georgetown.
Yeah, and who ran the newspaper out of Georgetown? Was it a Jesuit named Bernard Dark from the UK who was almost certainly connected with MI6?
Yeah, it was Bernard Dark at SJ. He was supposedly assassinated by the Forbes Burnham's forces there, and there was also the Jesuit Father Andrew Morrison, who actually, the Jesuit Father Andrew Morrison SJ also connected to MI6. He actually brought the first place Jim Jones preached was the local Catholic church in Guyana when he first moved his operations down there. That was that. I think that's how symbolic is that? The first place he goes to is the Catholic church in Georgetown, where there's the Jesuit priest connected to MI6. as the rector there. And supposedly, and then Andrew Morrison, was covering his own ass. He said, "Oh, so Jim Jones is this madman. He's this crazy guy."
And poor Bernard Dark was assassinated by renegade terrorist Jews. Really? I'm supposed to believe that?
I don't think. Who is George? You pointed. Who was the name of the guy who was assassinated by ISIS? That Jesuit trained journalist.
Foley, James Foley. He went to Marquette in Milwaukee.
He went to Marquette. Okay, so that could have that Drake assassination or Dark assassination in Guyana in the 70s could have been like the Foley beheading. Well, I do think some of the beheadings could be real, but undoubtedly they're doing this to drive up like the mystique and like to make ISIS look more menacing and terrorizing than they actually are. Okay. And that's the purpose of them.
Okay, we're just talking about Jim Jones and the People's Temple in Guyana in the late 1970s, 40 plus years ago. Well, something I've mentioned on the show before is the whole Jim Jones and People's Temple was a psyop within a psyop within a psyop, as Johnny likes to say. So since you're talking, 40 plus years ago, most people have never heard of that, or they said, "Oh yes, wasn't that place where all those people drank that Kool-Aid?" So that's people's perceptions. This is how people
George, learn their history and their George, really quickly, George, even at that, just to mention quick, like out of the people I've talked about, hey, do you know what Jonestown is? Like most people don't even know what it is at this point.
Okay, so and as I mentioned before, that gave rise to the expression or expressions, "Don't drink the Kool-Aid" or "Stop drinking the Kool-Aid" or some variation thereof. Because even in reality, even though I believe over 900 people died, less than 20 of them, maybe 2%, drank the cyanide-laced Kool-Aid. Now, I'm not exactly sure what happened down there, and odds are we never will, or most people won't. However, the perception is for people who know a little bit about it, that is that place down in South America where all those people drank the Kool-Aid at the behest of their crazy Protestant minister, Jim Jones. So that's another example why Protestantism is flawed, because this is the natural. Somebody like Michael Voris from the Vortex would say, this is the logical extreme or the logical conclusion of Protestantism and sola scriptura. Forgive me for bringing up religion here. See, because this is the perception. When you follow somebody like Jim Jones, this sort of thing can happen. That's how cults come about. That's why non-traditional churches, that's why fundamentalist churches are so dangerous, because you're just following one man and his interpretation of the Bible. That's why you should not be involved with them.
Yeah, George, if we could just get back to pre-Vatican II Latin Mass, Roman Catholicism, and kick out all those homosexuals, everything would just be fine. And real quick, that's a brilliant take on the psyop and propaganda from our friend, the church militant. And that all in and of itself is a psyop, because true Christianity, and forgive me, non-Christians, for a minute, true Christianity is decentralized. The reason why the Catholic Church is the body of Sauron in a spiritual realm, again, forgive me, speaking as a Christian here. Ultimately, we Christians, look, we give you names, places, and dates. And if you wipe out the Catholic Church, you will have nirvana. You will have paradise. All of these evils, all of this incredible corruption will be almost completely and totally wiped out. We Christians take it one step further. The power behind the Catholic Church is Satan, is the devil. So the Catholic Church is the nervous structure, the body. It's the physical apparatus that the devil works through. And it is thoroughly and completely centralized. The reason why the Catholic Church is so successful in its role is because it has agents everywhere. Why was it at the founding of this country, Catholics weren't even allowed to vote. That's because they understood the smallest, lowest Catholic anywhere was basically an agent of a malignant foreign power. It's just like the Matrix. One of the reasons why the two brothers that created the Matrix were turned into two sisters as part of their punishment. Anybody, any Catholic anywhere, can be turned into an agent of the Catholic Church. In the confessional, they might not even realize it. They're giving information on someone of interest to the Catholic Church, and boom, they can take action on it instantly.
Well, absolutely. You're just to that point. Any Catholic, at any point can be tapped and say, "Hey, we need some donations." Hey, can you vote for this guy? Hey, do this fundraiser. Et cetera, et cetera. Aver Manhattan even wrote about that. I think he even worded it the same. He said, any Catholic is a potential agent of the Vatican. He wrote that in
and that is the importance of a Catholic education. True Christianity is completely and thoroughly decentralized. A real Christian follows no religion. A real Christian should not even be going to a church, should not be going to a central authority of any kind. A real Christian should be at home, worshiping with friends and family at a day of their convenience, reading the Bible for themselves. True Christianity is a decentralized personal faith. Anywhere there is religion, it is satanic. It is co-opted. It is corrupted. It is controlled.
Well, I was saying, like all of the this explosion of Protestant evangelical preachers is just completely Jesuit co-opted. Like it's going back. Like who is the first televangelist in America? It was Catholic priest Charles Coughlin. If you who was the first, who was the first, TV evangelist of today who had an audience of millions of people? Like Charles Coughlin was reaching 30 million people in his heyday, on the radio, kind of the demagogic character, you see a Pat Robertson of today, and Pat Robertson, for instance, I have documented, he was working with the Knights of Malta, his group was donating millions to with the Knights of Malta to the Iran Contra, or the Nicaraguan Contras, for instance, in the 80s. What was that Schuler, that Protestant TV televangelist who had the statue of Fulton Sheen in his?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, our buddy the militant said that Schuler was seriously considering an open conversion to Roman Catholicism. And how many of these phony evangelicals are members of the Council for National Policy, a phony conservative secret society thoroughly owned and dominated by the Catholic Church? Pat Robertson is one of them, by the way.
Oh, it's tons. I bet if you go down the list of all of the big evangelical preachers, they're all,
all phonies. Joseph Farah, Evangelical World Net Daily, Joseph Farah from Lebanon. George, jump in. I know you got something on this stuff. Or not.
Or is this while George is going, just another connection to the evangelicals was this is kind of another, I guess, a Jim Jones as psyop, because they were able to accomplish the same thing. But it was Rios Montt in Guatemala erected a brutal military dictatorship, police state crackdowns in Guatemala in the 70s. And I think estimates were about 200,000 natives, 200,000 natives perished. But interestingly, Rios Montt converted from Catholicism to this Protestant sect of Christianity, and he was backed by Pat Robertson and the big Protestant, quote, Protestant televangelists in the U.S. at the time. But it's interesting, Rios Montt, he had a brother while these genocides, the massacres were taking place in Guatemala, so-called in the name of Protestantism. His brother was the Catholic archbishop there, down in Guatemala, the whole time. So in a case like that, that's doubtlessly the Catholic, archbishop is in on it. And they played the psyop where supposedly the Catholic archbishop brother was telling Rios Montt he needs to, ease up.
Hey Eric, why don't you bring up the picture of that piece of shit, that clown, Pat Robertson, on one of those papist rags, Henry Luce's, what is it, Time, or Life or one of those papist rags with his Freemasonic lion's paw hand that he had to run to show everybody?
Oh, is it Time magazine? Let me see.
I think so. Yeah, just
Oh
bring
yeah,
up,
right here.
Yeah,
Here, let me pull this up.
do a shot for that. No different than Jorge Mario Bergoglio on the subway in Buenos Aires doing his hidden hand little gesture there too. George,
Oh,
where you at?
this one here.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, he's a good Christian, right? With that Freemasonic shit. You wonder how that guy's, and he's also got military connections too.
And there he is with Donald Trump. Yeah, this guy's got like CIA connections and like connections to the Vatican and the Knights of Malta. So this guy, I think, is a classic example of a Jesuit Protestant plant.
Yeah,
this guy's in reality serving the Jesuits, disguising himself as a Protestant. Like
Henry
it's universal in all of the books on the Jesuit order. Dating back to the 1800s. All of the authors, make the claim that the Jesuits disguise themselves as Protestant preachers. And all sorts of preachers, not just Protestants, but just in particular, they do disguise themselves as Protestants.
The Freemasons are the plausible deniability for use of phony Protestants by the Catholic Church. Freemasonry is thoroughly owned, and at least by their, according to their own historian Albert Mackey, at least the first 26 degrees were created by the Jesuits at Claremont, and probably all of them, all the degrees. And it was Henry Luce that's responsible for creating the massive legend that is Billy Graham. Puff Billy Graham, he said.
Oh, and Luce's wife was a Dame of Malta, devout Catholic. Maybe like the Popess of America at that time. She was made ambassador to Catholic Italy.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Claire Booth Luce, several of these conservatard muckraking females are part of the Claire Booth Luce Foundation. Whether it's Aunt Coulter, whose daddy was a good papist in the Federal Bureau of Inquisition, or Michelle Malkin, who herself is a good Roman Catholic, open Roman Catholic, whereas Coulter is just kind of a behind the scenes Roman Catholic. And I had this up from Blight Blart from George's buddy Hugh, how Malkin just did a book on the open borders, which is just so hilarious. And she gets into how the Catholic Church is implicated in the open borders, but she also blames that evil Jew boogeyman George Soros, and then admits that Soros is in bed with the Vatican.
The propaganda, they can't help themselves. They got to follow the line. They have to, blame the Jews. It's really that simple. Like that, it's all over the place.
Meanwhile, you have Catholic clergy everywhere openly breaking the law and ushering in millions upon millions upon millions of illegals, particularly in the United States, where that vast majority of the millions of illegals are good Roman Catholics. In Europe, it's not as easy. They settle for Muslim immigrants because the bottom line is the same. You still have massive strife, a war of cultures, people pissed off all over the place, and they may not be good Roman Catholics like they are here. Pardon me.
I think it's amazing that people blame the Jews for like the illegal immigration, the wave of the invasion that's taken place. Like there's a recent article by Breitbart. It's titled "Jesuit Chief: No Country Has the Right to Turn Away Migrants." It's from Arturo Sosa. Then Breitbart says the Superior General of the Jesuits declared this week that no country has the right to turn away migrants, claiming the land belongs to everyone. Well, that's communism. But the challenge for a country that receives migrants is not only reception but integration, which means receiving the contribution that immigrants bring, said Jesuit Father Arturo Sosa Escobar in an interview with Tempet. Quote, "They come to make a contribution which is greater than what they receive from the host country," he claimed. And it continues, but I recommend people should read this article. But the Jesuit general literally says no country has the right to turn away migrants. So it's not the Jews, that are. Where's the Jewish leadership that's calling for this? I don't see police chiefs. First, where are the Jewish immigrants coming over the border? How many Jews are coming over from South America? I see 95% Catholics coming over. Like how many Jews are coming over from Mexico?
In Europe,
like 0.0% 0.001% of the total coming over the southern border are Jews. Yet they're
in Europe, the Roman Catholic Church is so dominant that it's open, whereas here in the United States, they have to keep it under wraps and keep it quiet. I talked about this, I think, on one of my podcasts a while ago, the Kevin Costner movie 3 Days to Kill, 2014, where they talk about that squatters' rights that in Europe, where if you have a piece of property and vagrants, migrants come in and they just start squatting on your property, they have a need for that. It's theirs. You have no private property. And it's depicted in the movie where he's got a safe house. He's got an apartment that he uses as a safe house. And I think it's like African migrant squatters come in and the cops tell them that they can stay. Look, they've got, they got a pregnant woman that's going to have a baby. Look, hey, they have need and you don't, buddy. And it's glorified. He later on goes on to make a wonderful relationship with this squatting family. They're just good people. All of the migrants, all of the illegal aliens in America, they're just good people. There are no rapists and murderers and drunk drivers like the railroad killer that I have on my blog that bounced back and forth, that was catch and release over and over and over again by the oath-breaking scum, cops and INS and Border Patrol. Catch him, release him, he go rape and murder again. Ramirez, Resendez, I think is his name. Over and over and over again. Every fucking cop that released that piece of shit should all be serving the same sentence of execution that bastard monster did.
Oh, absolutely. I 100% agree. And, this is so nefarious because while they're doing this, like they're letting all these illegals come in, like, they're doing these catch and releases to the guys like the railroad killer who are causing, irreversible harm to American citizens. They declared, this was in like 2014, but there was a judge that declared, do you guys hear about the Constitution free zone by the border? So like they've declared 100-mile radius from the northern and southern border and from the coastlines, saying that the Constitution does not apply here. This covers the entire state of Florida, the entire state of Maine, the entire state of Michigan. There's like 200 million Americans that live in the so-called Constitution-free zone. So while they're bringing in all these legals, and they now can just harass everyday Americans with like police state measures, which is what they're doing. Recently, they stopped a bus in Syracuse, New York, and like demanded like immigration papers of everyone, like on the bus. I guarantee 99.9, maybe 99.5% of the people on that bus were average, American citizens, like American people. So this shows the nefarious. Like while they're letting this immigration wave come through, the Knights of Columbus gave $250K to refugees coming over the southern border. They're doing these. They're using because Trump has declared like a national emergency. Jesuit-educated Trump, which gives the military, the police, and the president much more powers. And they're using these police powers to harass everyday Americans while they're letting the illegals come over. And it's very sinister. And when we saw like the Democrat Party at their debates, all 10 candidates raised their hands saying that their healthcare plans will provide for illegal immigrants. Which is going to like loot like the country, like the 22 trillion in debt. Like most Americans, are dirt poor. Like 40% of the country like is below the poverty line, 45% of the country. So like what money do they have to give more millions and millions to cover medical costs of these illegal immigrants?
It's open treason. It's high treason. Either the debt or the open borders. Absolutely every official involved should be at risk of capital punishment. Every cop, every politician, based on their personal involvement. How deeply? Because it is soul-killing, nation-killing high treason. The wide open borders. I got them right here in my town. I am neck deep. I walk out my house and all I hear is Spanish. Every cop, every politician, every judge, every prosecutor personally involved in the corruption. We just read for you in Buffalo how the fuck are cops obeying? Where are you getting your unwritten rules on how not to arrest Catholic priests who are committing crimes, particularly Catholic priests who are raping children? You pieces of shit. You should be hanging every cop piece of shit that broke their oath and protected the Catholic Church as they raped children, as they raped your children, every cop involved should be hanging by his genitals in a cell with the priest, waiting to be executed. I said the same thing about the debt.
This is super diabolical, but like now with just the Jesuit puppets on the U.S. Supreme Court, like the cops they're doing what their job is. Like they have no right now. Like the Jesuit puppets on the Supreme Court have ruled that the police have no duty to protect any individual American. So the police have no duty to. And it was Antonin Scalia who wrote who has Opus Dei Jesuit trained, who wrote this was Casa Rock versus Gonzalez in 1999, which is just as disgusting. But like the Jesuit puppets on the Supreme Court have enabled the police to engage in this.
That decision was for them. That decision wasn't for us. That decision was for them. That was to let them off the hook. They had been breaking their oaths for generations and committing crimes, cops committing crimes for generations. And so that decision let them off the hook in the same way that papist Supreme Court Justice Walter Brennan, Walter or William? I think it was Walter. Brennan, George, where the fuck did you go, George? Brennan, whose little footnote in a Supreme Court decision created this outrageous mass crime of anchor babies. If an illegal can pop across the border and pop out their baby, that baby is magically an American citizen. Are you out of your fucking mind? How is that law in the United States? It's not law. It's a footnote by a papist Supreme Court justice. And if you give me a second, I'll come up with the actual Supreme Court stuff.
Well,
Yin Yang versus
Johnny, I'm right here.
Where did you go? Where did you go? Where have you been? Get in here. What do you got for Brennan and anchor babies? What, were you taking a dump?
I believe that will. Well, I wish. I mean, I don't have a valid excuse. I was just looking up some stuff. I realized I should have been a little bit quicker in my response. Okay, so you're talking about William Brennan, the Irish Roman Catholic Supreme Court justice who voted in favor of Roe versus Wade, 1973. Are you talking about that William Brennan?
Yeah, give me a second. I'll give you the decision.
I'm pretty sure the Jew, the quote Jew, Michael Chertoff, who is the second DHS secretary, worked in William Brennan's office, and then Chertoff's wife is a professor at Georgetown. But yeah, I just wanted to add that in. Just if you guys weren't aware, Chertoff worked in his office.
Is that a relation to the other Chertoff from? Wait, what's the first name of that Chertoff?
Michael Chertoff.
Michael?
Oh, that's also the NSA Chertoff, right? Whose wife?
Yeah, NSA Homeland Security Chertoff. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. 1982 Plyler versus Doe. No plausible distinction with respect to the 14th Amendment jurisdiction can be drawn between resident aliens whose entry in the United States was lawful and resident aliens whose entry was unlawful. Are you fucking kidding me? How is that now the law? That diarrhea that came out from a papist Supreme Court injustice is the law of the land. Keep going, George. George,
and that's why, and that just shows like the importance of the Supreme Court. You know, it's a very really, that's why the Jesuits. That's why we said earlier there's 7 open Catholics on the Supreme Court. It
is a bottleneck of tyranny. The Supreme Court is a bottleneck of tyranny that has no. The average citizen has no jurisdiction in any way. They're not going to get close to a Supreme Court justice if they're angry for any reason. How many states in my Commonwealth a federal judge made homosexual marriage legal? A single renegade Luciferian boy buggering federal judge. They've done that in every. Are you fucking kidding me? How is that even possible? The people should be voting for police chiefs, not just rarely do they get to vote for the sheriff. The people should be voting for police chiefs and all judges, period. This disconnect from justices is how this tyranny is in place.
Well,
George,
they pack the court. You know, Trump's packing the courts. Like, both of his Supreme Court picks both went to Jesuit Georgetown Prep. Like, are you kidding me? How, like, is there any more like in your face evidence that the Jesuits packing the court? Like, Trump's only had 2 Supreme Court nominees. Both went to the most expensive prep school in America, which happens to be run by the Jesuits.
And they still control all the key positions in the rest of the government. How many papists have been Speaker of the House?
Oh, the last 2, like Boehner went to Jesuit, Xavier, Knight of Columbus. Paul Ryan is a devout Catholic. Paul Ryan, I reprinted this CNN article from 2017 or 2018. Paul Ryan said at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast that America needs Catholicism. That's your Speaker of the House. He says America needs Catholicism. That was
real quick. John McCormick, Tip O'Neill, Tom Foley, Newt Gingrich, Nancy Pelosi, John Boehner, Paul Ryan. There's just to name a few in the past several decades. George, jump in. You're not allowed to call me with all your material anymore, George. You're not getting it out here. Let's go.
Oh, okay. So, of course, you had the very first one, John McCormick, back in the 1960s. He was the first. He was Speaker of the House from 1961 to 1970. And that was basically the Lyndon Johnson era, the New Deal. I'm sorry, not the Great Society, the War on Poverty era. So,
McCormick actually, he would read United Fruit Company executives' speeches and statements into the congressional record during while that coup was going on. He was the House Whip at that time, but that's pretty open, treason to be doing that. And he was a Knight of Columbus. I think and I've seen Avro Manhattan mentions that McCormick was also a Knight of St. Gregory the Great.
The ousting of Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954 by the Catholics in Action.
Oh, absolutely! That
yes.
Literally, E. Howard Hunt even said that Cardinal Spellman was giving the CIA the mission directives. Are you kidding me?
Well, and speaking of McCormick, he was the mentor of Thomas Tip O'Neill. And O'Neill was a speaker during the 1980s, during the Reagan era. And I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. Now, Tip O'Neill was supposed to be the conservative, the liberal, leftist, Irish Roman Catholic. And people were wondering back then, well, how was he going to get along with the arch conservative Ronald Reagan? They got along fabulously.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that reminds, yeah. They do this all the time. Well, I guess this isn't as open, but Michael Harrington, the guy who founded the Democratic Socialists of America, educated at 3 Jesuit schools, he was credited for Lyndon Johnson's creation of the War on Poverty. But Johnson was, he was he was in the Democrat Party, but Johnson's policies were pretty, in some ways, they were more right wing, especially the Vietnam military interventions.
But that's
it shows that the Jesuit agents on the quote left and the quote right work together.
But it's actually this. He was not right wing any more than Reagan was right wing. It is not right wing to enact criminal, needless war. That's a psyop. It's actually more populism is a proper definition of true right-wing values. Right wing. What are right-wing values? Is personal determination and independence. And the left values overwhelming fascism and control of the state, tyranny. The mere idea that we believe fascism is a right-wing value. Fascists are far right when in reality, fascism is actually far left. Independent determination is a right-wing value. And the overwhelming, and so Ronald Reagan, who was a communist, in his days as an actor and before he had his conversion to becoming. What did Ronald Reagan do? Nothing. Now, if you understand that, hey, Mark, good to see you. If you understand, understand that the Cold War was completely fabricated, and it was a stage by which you could get your phony conservative credentials. Wow, you're talking about a guy that was a bold-faced communist all the way to his death. The only credentials of Ronald Reagan for being a conservative was his commie fighting. Meanwhile, it was all a complete fabrication.
Well, the commie fighting and like the his Reaganomics. He simultaneously enacted big government legislation while like deregulating the industry, which allowed for like monopolization to take place.
More gun control.
And like for example, a Jesuit agent playing like the quote right dialectic with Reagan was Lane Kirkland. Lane Kirkland was Ronald Reagan in the Reagan administration. He was the longtime head of the AFL-CIO, the Federation of Labor, like the American Federation of Labor merged with the Congress of Industrial Organizations. But Lane Kirkland went to Jesuit Georgetown, was like a staunch like quote anti-communist, and he was responsible for a lot of like unions being like shredded by big corporate interests and like unions, that's starting to buy shares into the corporations that they're supposedly representing their workers against.
Ronald Reagan was
but this Lane Kirkland is an example of a Jesuit who plays the quote like the right, I guess, like the quote right conservative side of the dialectic, when in reality he's working with the Jesuits for more federal power concentration.
Ronald Reagan was the perfect plant. Another, just like this Pence, born and raised Roman Catholic, and then becomes an evangelical Christian. Meanwhile, both his daddy Jack and his brother Neil are devout papists and Knights of Columbus. Pardon me.
Sorry to cut you. Did you guys see? This was just you brought up Pence. This reminded me of this, Johnny. This week, Mike Pence's nephew married into Kellyanne Conway's like daughter or something like that. Like, are you kidding me? Kellyanne Conway is a devout Catholic White House press secretary. Her name is Giovanna Coya. She married. Giovanna Coya is the press assistant for the White House. She married Mike Pence's nephew, John Pence. Giovanna Coya went to Catholic University in America, and apparently this was like a high security wedding with like military present.
Don't pay any attention to that, because Mike Pence is an evangelical Christian. That's just a coincidence that his son continues to marry into the caviar eating, child slaughtering Roman Catholic elite that control this country behind the scenes.
Oh, and it's so in your face. Like, are you kidding me? Like they said they even shut down like the air traffic in the area. There was no planes allowed.
You don't get to go where you want to go, because the child of and by the way, I think that Mike Pence has been implicated in child sex slave trafficking as well. Although I don't have the details. I
doubt. Just all the Jesuit connections to him. His brother Greg Pence has 2 Jesuit degrees from Loyola Chicago. He filled Mike's seat in Indiana. And Mike Pence's national security advisor, Keith Kellogg, went to Jesuit Santa Clara, and Keith Kellogg was a part of the official 9/11 investigation. And now he's Mike Pence's national security advisor. Mike Pence is completely, controlled by the Vatican. It's just in his recent marriage with his nephew. Let me get the name of his nephew again. This John Pence's marriage to Giovanna Coya from the the Conway family. Kellyanne Conway is currently, like, if you look on her Wikipedia, it says incumbent. She's currently a presidential advisor to Donald Trump. And as Mark Fanning said, that is a in your face Catholic nepotism. This happened like this week. This marriage.
Hey, we should probably start looking to wrap it up, but I still have all that information. I got a ton of information. I don't know if you guys had a chance to look into the stuff that I sent on Fletcher Prouty and Nellie Spellman in Vietnam and all that.
No. Is that the Times article? That was
there's a couple of different things. There's Fletcher Prouty's book, and then there's a Times article. Excuse me.
I noticed that Times article is kind of ripping John Cooney's biography of Spellman. It said like it wasn't a very good biography. But
Yeah, no, and any biography that tries to say that Nellie Spellman was gay, was homosexual, that obviously is not very well researched. And it's a good thing that Cooney backed off on those accusations, because he knew he was out of bounds on that as a good Catholic himself.
Oh, great point. And even though I thought the Times article was even kind of like saying like it was unfair that Cooney was trying to say the cardinal had like political influence. It was baseless. Like his accusations that Cardinal Spellman was like an intricate financial player in like the world of finance. There's like that book, like in the book, friend, it says like Cardinal Spellman got the Archdiocese of New York buying shares of like AT&T, General Electric. He lists a bunch of companies, like Exxon's in there.
Yeah. So our incognito Jesuit friend, this started off me looking up Eric John Phelps and why it was, pardon me, his accusation in Vietnam. Vietnam is known as Spelly's War. Well, that sent me to the New York Slimes, acknowledging that Nellie Spellman, Francis Cardinal Spellman, was a big cheerleader for the meat grinder of heretics, Protestants, and Buddhists in Vietnam. That's a fact. And whether or not he was actually administering policy behind the scenes as well as being a cheerleader in front of the scenes also seems to be the case.
Oh, Johnny, I think that is the case. In John Cooney's book, he shows a picture of Ngo Diem, the devout Catholic dictator, strongman, cult of personality dictator in South Vietnam. He shows a picture of Ngo Diem kissing Spellman's hand, kind of like bowing to him.
It is probably kissing something else as well, but we won't go there.
Yeah, I'm gonna read off some of this
after the press conferences, probably, no doubt. These guys are nefarious.
Not during the press. After the press conference, I'm gonna read some of this and I'll put it in later. Let's see. This is from the New York Slimes in 1984. Spellman, Archbishop of New York, advisor to several presidents: Roosevelt, Johnson, influential in New York politics. Supervised chaplains around the world from World War II, Korea to Vietnam. Now think of the power of Catholic chaplains in war. Cultivated the rich and influential. Father's money enabled Spellman for 2 Jesuit schools.
Oh, John, you said another Catholic chaplain, just adding quick here, Father Francis Duffy, a World War I chaplain. He was Wild Bill Donovan's like mentor and chaplain, and there's a statue of him at Times Square. So it shows like the influence is pretty big.
Yeah. Spellman's personal friend. Go ahead, George.
Okay, forgive me for interrupting. As we've discussed before, the so-called Catholic bishop in Laredo, Texas, James Tamayo, was an Air Force chaplain in the reserves, and he retired the rank of major. So I'm just wondering, are these chaplains just simply hearing confessions and ministering the mass, or are they doing something else?
I think they're, well, you know what? Another just said this guy, I think, was kind of like the modern day Spellman. I'll link the article I did on him, but Cardinal Edwin Frederick O'Brien, Spellman ordained this guy. He was the in Spellman before it was 1986 where they made an official archdiocese for the military services under John Paul II. So before that, though, they had the Catholic priest be like they called it, I think, the apostolic vicar of the American Armed Forces, which is what Spellman was, and that's why you can see photos of him like flying on like massive military cargo planes, like empty cargo planes, just Spellman, and going over.
The child trafficking priest Anthony Joseph Maskell, who trafficked teenagers out of Archbishop Keogh in Baltimore, Maryland, who was the central figure in the rape and bludgeoning to death of Sister Kathy Ann Sesnick, was a chaplain to both the Baltimore Police Department and I think also the United States Air Force.
Oh wow! Well, again, that's actually I got to watch. I know Netflix did the show on that case. I want to. It's probably whitewashed. I'm curious to see how they present it. And
well, look, it's safe because it was 50 years after the crimes occurred, and there was no one that was going to be. So there's actually a lot of detail. I watched. There's like 7 episodes, and I watched all 7 episodes with a notepad. So it's absolutely well worth it. That's what the papists do. They commit the crimes. They allow the crimes to fester. Everybody involved with the crime is long since dead. Then they give you the outrageous, heinous details of the crimes. But they're the ones that do it all.
No, I guess they are safe with that, with the time span. The statute of limitations is well over. What was the name of this the guy again from the Baltimore kiosk school? Or
it's Anthony Joseph Maskell. He went by his middle name, Joseph Maskell, Maskell. And it was Archbishop Keogh High School where he was farming out teenagers that he was abusing there. He and the other clergy.
Well, that's it. It's like you did a special video on this. What was Craig Harrison, Bakersfield Police, 2019. This year. Police chaplain was molesting kids and completely got away with it. Just as Maskell did.
Yeah. The cops repeatedly ignored complaints on the rare occasions that the diseased Catholics wake up, come to their senses, and try to report a crime to the cops instead of to their clergy and to the bishop. On the rare occasions, the Whore of Babylon has that covered with her oath-breaking criminal agents in the police departments, in the prosecutor's offices. But that at least, hey, a couple of Catholic families actually came to their senses instead of succumbing to the disease of Roman Catholicism and simply taking. I'm telling you, 98% of the time, that's what I read when a Catholic parent finds out that their child has been raped or sodomized or abused or violated by a priest. They go to their hierarchy like the diseased zombie that they are.
Oh, it's just like the diseased police departments, suppress it within the Catholic hierarchy as well. Like as you showed in Buffalo, they had
We started that with Buffalo, how oath-breaking criminal cops were catching and releasing these monster priests because that's what their hierarchy told them. I asked a cop here in town, why am I surrounded by illegal aliens? Oh, we don't enforce that. Oh, which laws do you decide to enforce and not enforce, you oath-breaking piece of shit?
I'm saying they'll enforce that. I'm just saying. I'm sure if they catch you with like a bit of weed on you, or like if you're speeding, they'll enforce that though. They'll give you a big ticket. Like
if you're not a government-sanctioned drug dealer, if you're not high on the government's list, because the real drug dealers are in the police department and the U.S. government, the big drug busts come from these little folk on the side that try to horn in on the government's business. Or worse, is just some poor bastard, suffering from depression or cancer or whatnot, is trying to make himself happy with a little weed. Those are the ones that get hammered.
Oh, great point. And, Gary Webb, I watched the Kill Messenger movie recently. His work showed that the CIA is trafficking drugs. There's been many, like Sherman Skolnick. I know Skolnick actually made the accusation that the Knight of Columbus Jeb Bush in Florida is controlling the drug trade out of Florida. I've archived a New York Times article from like 1983, which said and it was a funny title. It's like it said the New York Times article was something along the lines like anti-drug unit of the CIA sends a ton of cocaine to the United States, and they sent it through Venezuela. But the New York Times had a little article. I think that's the only New York Times article admitting this, that the New York Times wrote, and I think it was by author Tim Weiner for the Times. But they admitted from an official establishment source that the CIA was smuggling drugs.
Yeah, that is a Bush family business. It's not John Ellis Bush. Knight of Open Papists and Knight of Columbus, John Ellis Bush. That's a family business that was a partnership with the Clintons. And here's another papist whistleblower. I don't know if I wouldn't doubt it. I expect that Terry Kent Reed is a Roman Catholic. I know that Oliver North figures prominently in the book. He's a papist. I think North is born and raised Catholic and then supposedly is now evangelical. More bullshit. But Compromised explains how it's a family business for the Bushes and the Clintons, and it's what fueled the cocaine fueled their presidencies. So, and of course, just Compromise has absolutely nothing about the Catholic Church in it. You have to know the truth, and this fills in a lot of the gaps at the ground level. In the same way that Wilcox Target Patton does the same thing. It explains how Knight of Malta William Donovan was responsible for assassinating George Patton. Tells you nothing about the Catholic Church. That's how these papists give out half-truths and partial truths. So I probably should get going. I don't know if you guys had. I wanted to read some of this on Vietnam. Let me do some of this on Vietnam.
Well, Johnny, before you get into Vietnam, I wanted to mention this. Just the guy I mentioned, the kind of modern day Cardinal Spellman, Cardinal Edwin O'Brien. He's currently the Grand Master of the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre. He was ordained by Spellman in '65, but this guy compares the Iraq War to the Vietnam Catholic meat grinder. I've quoted multiple statements of him. He compares the Iraq War to Vietnam, and like Spellman, Baltimore son of Father Edwin O'Brien. He has leapt from military planes, served in the jungles during the Vietnam War, and traveled extensively to the current battle zones in Afghanistan and Iraq. This guy is a very, very intriguing guy, to say the least. He was like the official. He was the head of the archdiocese for the military services, but he's basically this guy's like not talked about like at all in the media. But he's basically like our modern day Spellman. And think about this is just one statement he said in 2003 to the Catholic military chaplains. This shows that this Catholic priest, like Spellman, got involved in Vietnam, is deeply involved in the Iraq War. Edwin O'Brien said, this is just like 20 seconds. He said, given the complexity of factors involved, many of which understandably remain confidential, this is a Catholic priest saying this about the Iraq War, it is altogether appropriate for members of our armed forces to presume the integrity of our leadership and its judgments, and therefore to carry out their military duties in good conscience. Our leadership is not referring to the Pope. Is not referring to the Pope. It is to be hoped that all factors which have led to our intervention will eventually be made public and will shed light upon our president's decision. And this guy's, just to sum it up, this guy's an interesting character also because Edwin O'Brien, supposedly Pope John Paul II was very vocal against the Iraq War. But this Cardinal Edwin O'Brien, like the head of the military services in the U.S., the archdiocese there, was very, very pro-Iraq War. This guy was like
you wonder how these boy raping, cross-dressing scum like Nellie Spellman and O'Brien, you wonder how they are completely absent, if not openly pro-abortion, openly pro-homosexual proliferation, sexual deviancy, and yet they're such ardent war hawks, which is supposedly right-wing, but it's really not.
Johnny, I'm pretty sure the church militant even outed O'Brien for being a homosexual. They did like a special video.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And part of an underground of bringing in sexual deviant clergymen. I gotta look up more on that.
Yeah, that was the crux of it. Yeah, but that is very interesting. And this guy, he's currently like a Grand Master of the Holy Equestrian Order of the Sepulchre. So you can see photos of him like wearing like the Dagon Babylonian fish hat, like the Pope wears. So he's very.
Yeah, the Dagon mitre, the fish head mitre.
But just if you want to go into Vietnam, Johnny, I know we should probably wrap it up. But just O'Brien, people are aware he compared the Iraq War to Vietnam, just so people should realize that. Like Vietnam was literally like a Catholic Inquisition, and in the video I found that the Iraqi government is basically controlled through the Jesuit Baghdad College. The current prime minister there, Adin Abdul Mahdi, the current official prime minister of Iraq, was educated by Jesuits.
They are exactly the same thing. They are endless, ongoing wars for the purpose of slaughtering heretics, proliferating heroin, and making criminal amounts of money at war. Now, this is from Leroy Fletcher Prouty's book, JFK, the CIA, Vietnam, and the plot to assassinate John F. Kennedy. I'm going to cut to the chase. I have a lot on this, but we're out of time. This starts on page 108. The Geneva Conference had convened on April 26th before the defeat of the French. Listen, the Geneva disposition actually convened before the Dien Bien Phu, which means they all had this carefully planned. The conference established an untenable demarcation zone. In other words, the solution to Vietnam was to cut Vietnam in half. Meanwhile, southern Vietnam had no infrastructure, no government. It was absolutely untenable. It was guaranteed to fail from the beginning. Before the conclusion of the conference, summer 54, the CIA's Saigon military mission had begun its political, psychological, and terrorist activities. Terrorist activities, which again, chaos, never solved anything, just made matters worse.
I was saying that would have been the Operation Phoenix program. Oh, it looks like Johnny's screen is stuck there.
Okay, Eric, I'm not sure. Eric, can you hear me?
I can hear you good, George.
Okay, I just want to mention a couple of things. I realize the show is almost over, and I need to be going relatively soon myself. Okay, couple of things. As I've mentioned before, I live in Sonoma County, California, which is about an hour or so north of San Francisco. The county has a population of about maybe 500,000 people, and the seat is in Santa Rosa. The current mayor of Santa Rosa, California is Tom Spedheim. He got his undergrad degree from St. Mary's College, which is near San Francisco, in La Moraga, which is near San Francisco. It's a Catholic school. His predecessor, Chris Kersey, went to high school at Regis High near Denver, Colorado. The current police chief of Santa Rosa, California, Rainer Navarro, got his master's degree from University of San Diego. The chief of police of Petaluma, California, which is the second largest community in the county, Ken Savano, got his undergrad degree from St. Mary's. The district attorney of my county, and I've mentioned this to you before, is Jill Ravitch. She got her law degree from the University of San Francisco. So almost all your major key players in this county have some sort of nexus with the Church of Rome through their education.
Yeah, wow, that's full, complete control. All the key positions. And George, on the topic of California, I'll send you this, George. I found a lot of Trump's appointments for the state of California have come from Jesuit Georgetown University. For instance, Trump wanted Nicola T. Hanna. Trump appointed to serve as United States Attorney for the Central District of California. Went to Jesuit Georgetown. And this Jonathan, I don't know if you heard of this name. This is an interesting guy. I assume this guy is like a papal court Jew with his name. Jonathan R. Cohen of California is the Deputy Representative of the United States to the United Nations. And he went to Jesuit Georgetown, for instance. I found just now we're on the topic of California. Let me see if I can pull up, because I listed probably literally 50 Trump appointments that went to Georgetown in these 3 articles, all quoting from the official WhiteHouse.gov website.
If I could just mention something before, I've probably brought this up in the show before. People like engaging the psyop about how bitter enemies, or what bitter enemies Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi are, the current Speaker of the House. Nancy Pelosi, in addition to being Italian Roman Catholic, she went to Trinity College in Maryland. Her husband, Paul, is on the board of directors of Georgetown. Paulie Jr. got his undergrad degree from Georgetown. Christina Pelosi got her undergrad degree from Georgetown, and one of the other daughters went to Loyola Marymount. So at least 3 of their children, of the Pelosi children, went to Jesuitical schools.
George, pause for a second, because this is pissing me off. How every time I open my mouth, this is cutting me off. Let me get this out real quick because it's good stuff. Phoenix program that Eric had mentioned. and this is Leroy Fletcher Prouty, page 102. Before the war was over, the CIA had set up the Phoenix program, supposedly along civil affairs lines. Actually, it became one of the most brutal, murderous creations of the war. As a result of the Phoenix program alone, tens of thousands of Vietnamese were slaughtered. And by the way, who was behind it? Our whistleblower from Omaha, good old lawyer John DeCamp, who
Oh, it looks like Johnny's. So I mentioned John DeCamp wrote the Franklin cover-up book about Catholic seminarian. Worked with alongside Knight of Malta William Colby, the CIA station chief in Saigon, South Vietnam, to initiate the Operation Phoenix terror program. And just, as we showed, it's in the symbolism too with Operation Phoenix, because if you look at the official patch of the mission patch of Operation Phoenix in South Vietnam, there's the Roman military laurel wreath right on the patch. And then let me pull up this. I want to find this. You mentioned this Pelosi. Oh, it looks like Johnny's going to get back in here. I'm just going to share my screen for a second. Because you mentioned how Nancy Pelosi, George, has 3 daughters who attend Jesuit schools. And three.
At least 2 daughters and a son.
2 daughters and a son. And okay, so if you can see my screen here, so Donald Trump is the exact same. So Donald Trump sent Eric Trump to Jesuit Georgetown, Ivanka Trump to Jesuit Georgetown. Eric Trump's on the board of the Georgetown Business School. But I found another Trump daughter, Tiffany Trump, is currently attending Jesuit Georgetown as of 2019. She went to the University of Pennsylvania, where she graduated in 2016, and then she decided to go to Jesuit Georgetown. So I guess she flipped the switch. She did the opposite of Ivanka. But you can see the screen here. Here's a picture of Tiffany Trump's Instagram page, where it says Georgetown Law. And you can see here the Jesuit Georgetown Law folder here in her book. So it's right in your face. Like, Trump and Pelosi are not enemies. They're, both of them sent 3 of their kids to Jesuit schools.
Hey, so real quick, this Phoenix program was for Vietnam what the Holocaust was for Nazi Germany. The Phoenix program slaughtered thousands of Vietnamese and forced Vietnamese Catholics south, which was the impetus for the war itself. So again, this is from and who was involved? Our Franklin cover-up whistleblower and former almost monk seminarian John DeCamp and his boss, the Saigon station chief, the warrior monk Bill Colby, who would go on to become the papist director of Catholics in Action.
Well, actually, let me pull up. Johnny, actually, did you guys see my screen here? I just pulled up. This is the official mission patch of the Phoenix program. And you can see, though, just the Roman...
With the Roman laurels of conquest. Real quick, Prouty says, before the conclusion of the Geneva Convention in 1954, the CIA Saigon military mission had begun its political, psychological, and terrorist activities. It intended through clandestine activities in the hands of war makers. It worked into the hands of war makers to create a growing rift between the Viet Minh and the Tonkinese Catholics. Their goal was to force thousands of Catholics out of their homes. And he goes on to mention how difficult this was because Asians are very sedentary people. The Vietnamese did not want to move. This is page 109. Without a doubt, this mass of Catholic Northerners and its unwelcome impact upon the population of the South had more to do with the scope, severity, and duration of the American-made war in Vietnam than anything else. Did you hear what I just said? Leroy Fletcher Prouty, page 109, JFK. I'll read you the full title in a minute. Without a doubt. So in other words, Catholic migrants created the Vietnam War. Without a doubt, this mass of Catholic Northerners and its unwelcome impact upon the population of the South had more to do with the scope, severity, and duration of the American-made war in Vietnam than anything else. It was an astounding event for many reasons. How was such an enormous movement of otherwise immobile people even brought about? How were so many motivated to leave their ancestral homes and lands and villages? Had they been scared to death? Yes, they were. There can be no denying the fact that the influx of these hundreds of thousands of strangers on the already weary war, World War II under the Japanese, the French battles to retake Cochin China, Southern population, pushed them all to the breaking point. They were not victims of the Civil War in a classic sense so much as they found themselves in a situation analogous to that of the American Indians when hundreds of thousands of Europeans invaded their North American homeland and they decided to take it over for themselves. With the Catholic Go Din Diem in power, these intruders actually thought they had the right. You guys get that?
That's a great quote. Wow.
Well,
Catholic,
I know another. Just Avro Manhattan mentioned this. The CIA station chief Edward Lansdale was also working in this mass migration. And this was key because the South Vietnamese government wouldn't have had the support of the populace without this. They brought hundreds of thousands, millions of Catholics over, and they created rigid, Catholic. Them tried to model the government off of the syllabus of.
What was Lansdale? I've heard that Lansdale was a Knight of Malta. Was he?
I'm pretty sure he was like an apostate Protestant officially.
Right.
I know he was stationed in Vietnam at the time and was working in that Catholic mass migration. So you can see, like, by actions speak louder than words. He's working for the Catholic Church. He's probably a secret Catholic. I've
got a blog that says he was a reputed Knight of Malta, but it's nothing I can quote. Hey, George Lansdale cut his teeth.
Oh, it looks like we lost Johnny's audio there.
Okay, so
George, for me, I could probably go to the 2:30 mark. So that's about like 9 more minutes or so. Do you got anything you'd want to?
Okay, so
Johnny's audio should be back in here in a few seconds. Do you have anything?
Okay, all right. I had to be going as well, but there's a bunch of things I did not get to. Okay, so you're talking. Johnny was talking about the Phoenix.
Oh, looks like he's coming in and out. Oh, okay, he's reconnecting. Give me a second.
Okay.
Oh, I can hear you.
Real quick. Lansdale cut his teeth with the Catholic Church, raping the Philippines in 53 and 54. And there are Filipinos that say he helped the Catholic Church rob the Philippines of their wealth. And I've got links on that, and I'll put that in the chat. And
that's fantastic information.
Hey, that Lansdale is basically another Mark Clark. Lansdale is another Mark Clark.
Well, Mark Clark, the Covert Action Information Bulletin said that he wasn't the Knight of Malta. Mark Clark, Mark Clark was going to be the first official U.S. ambassador to the Vatican in 1952, when Truman appointed Mark Clark to be the ambassador to the Vatican. And Clark was the U.S. general who marched on to Rome in 44. So he was friends with Pope Pius XII. It's great. I'll have to look into more of Lansdale. This connection with the Philippines with him at the Catholic Church is very intriguing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna, with all my problems, I'm gonna probably back out. Guys, great show. We're running at almost 2.5 hours anyway. So
yeah, I was saying, do you have anything? George was gonna wrap up here, but I was gonna say I was gonna cut it off around the 2:30 mark.
Okay, so, go another 7 minutes. Sure.
Okay, sorry, Johnny, we didn't get to all the stuff that I have in my folder, but I guess we'll have to talk about the Liberace stuff and Bill Bixby the next time we do a show.
throw it out real quick, George.
Okay, Liberace, for those who lived from 1919 to 1987, you could say he was the forerunner to Elton John. Grew up in Wisconsin, a devout Roman Catholic, Italian and Polish Roman Catholic. he had an audience, I believe. You said, was it Pius the 23rd? Or I'm sorry, John the 23rd?
No, it was Pius. It was Pius the 12th. Baselli.
Oh, I beg your. Oh,
Yeah. So,
okay. So,
and let me underline this. He was an overt. He died of AIDS. He was an overt homosexual, and yet he, like everybody else, he was in good standing with the Catholic Church. Good enough standing to have an audience with, one of the architects of the Nazi Third Reich, Eugenio Pacelli, Pius number 12.
okay, so if I could just throw out a couple of things. Bill Bixby. Now, I liked him because I remember him from the Incredible Hulk from the 1970s. Bixby lived from 1934 to 1993. In addition to playing John Banner on the TV show The Incredible Hulk, he was in The Courtship of Eddie's Father, My Favorite Martian, and it did a bunch of other roles. His last one was Goodnight Beantown. Well, Bixby was from San Francisco, and I just found this out recently. He went to an unnamed Catholic high school, and he got kicked out because apparently he shot the bishop at the time with a slingshot. Well, good for him. But, that could have been, I don't know what Bixby's religious affiliation was, but he just had enough of a connection with Rome to get a little nudge. And something you mentioned is you were talking about Pat Robertson earlier, both of whom were in the Marine Corps, not at the same time. So, and of course, something else I wanted to mention was over the weekend, Eddie Money died, Edward Joseph Mahoney, who was partially Irish Roman Catholic. And he came from a long lines of Irish cops in New Jersey.
The name, George, I found it and I sent you an email. The name of Bixby's, I think it was a Catholic grammar school, is Grace Cathedral. And he did get kicked out, but he was dedicated enough for the Catholic student to sing in the choir.
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm sorry. I must have missed that detail. Okay, so that was how he got the nudge. And you could say, okay, let's talk about Bill Bixby for a second. Okay, he did the comedy show My Favorite Martian, so that pushed the whole Jesuitical narrative, of life on other planets. That was helpful to his career. And of course, as I said, he played David Banner on the Incredible Hulk, which had to do with mutations and scientific experiments going wrong. And so I understand, you're more into the comic books than I am, but I understand there have been some reboots of the Hulk. He's part of the comic book universe, so to speak, or the superheroes.
Well, yeah, the character plays prominently in all the Avenger movies. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So he was like, as far as I know, that was the first adaptation. The show he did in the 1970s was the first adaptation of the Hulk, or at least on screen. And so, yeah, so I guess that was how he served Rome in his career. But he died relatively young. He wasn't even 6 years old. He died of like a pancreatic cancer or something. So I'm not sure how that happened.
Yeah, Eddie Money Mahoney has had the perfect resume I spent a little time as a New York cop and had, I believe, a mother who was a Jew and a father who was a Catholic, just like Billy Joel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go down the list if you want to talk about.
I was like, a tie to the church, helps one's career. That's for sure, especially if it's in the entertainment industry.
Have one parent who's a Jew, one parent who's a Catholic, and you're a sexual deviant, and you will get to the top of any part of the entertainment industry.
Well, I think Bradley Cooper went to Georgetown. I think you could say that about him.
And he's connected to devout Roman Catholic, pro-abortion, pro-homosexual marriage, far left Lady Gaga. That's who.
I believe they're married or like their boyfriend girlfriend type of thing. But I should and just I don't know if you guys saw it. Just I'll wrap up with just some of this going through. I'll go through we could be here for like 30 minutes going through all the list I put together, so I won't go through all of them. But just some interesting recent appointments by Donald Trump, which just cements that the Jesuits are in control of his administration. But Trump made this guy. Have you heard of David Malpass? David Malpass is now the president of the World Bank, nominated by Donald Trump February 6, 2019. And Malpass went to Jesuit Georgetown University. This is from Trump's own words. After receiving a degree in international economics from Georgetown University's prestigious School of Foreign Service, David served as a deputy assistant of the Treasury under President Ronald Reagan and deputy assistant secretary of state under President George H.W. Bush. So interesting. So like the guy, president of the World Bank, currently is Jesuit trained. And and I found out we mentioned I think I showed the logo. I showed the logo of the Secretary of the Treasury has the papal key in it, like the silver key of the temporal power. Trump made some appointments into the Treasury Department. There's Bimal Patel of Georgia is Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Financial Institutions, and Bimal Patel went to Jesuit Georgetown University, for instance. Another Treasury appointment here. Trump. This was this week, actually, a week ago from today, September 10th, 2019. Trump nominated Mitchell A. Silk of New York to be Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for International Markets and Development. And Mitchell Silk of New York went to Georgetown School of Foreign Service. And this is the last one I'll mention here. It's an interesting appointment. Have you guys heard of David L. Norquist, the brother of economist Grover Norquist?
I've heard of Grover Norquist. He was deep in the 9/11 outreach.
Oh, okay. So that's probably why, because David Norquist's brother, this guy is literally like a very intriguing Jesuit guy, like lay Jesuit figure. I think David L. Norquist is currently the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and before this position, he was the. This is coming from the Trump White House. He says Jesuit trained at Georgetown. I added that, but he got his Master's of Arts in National Security Studies from Jesuit Georgetown. David Norquist, the current Deputy Secretary of Defense. But it says Norquist here. This is the brother of Grover Norquist, who's connected to the Jesuits, which I thought was an interesting connection. It says he was the first Senate-confirmed Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Homeland Security, where he established a formal process to eliminate pervasive weaknesses in the DHS's financial statement and put the department on its path to a clean audit option. That's coming from the whitehouse.gov website. So it is more proof of the overwhelming, Jesuit control of the DHS. I reposted a video a guy did in 2013 on that, which showed some of the overwhelming.
The only thing that's going to come up is how Grover Norquist is like married to a Muslim or something, and he was deep involved with the propaganda. To Viet Dinh, the Patriot Act, and any of the other connections. All roads lead to Rome.
Oh, it's incredible. Like I have to no boost. Like this is just one Jesuit school out of the 28. Trump has to have nominated at least 50 just Georgetown alumni into his administration. Just really quickly, this one was crazy. This girl here, Sarah Pitlick, is currently a judge on the United States District Court of Eastern District of Missouri. Trump nominated her August 14th, 2019. But Sarah Pitlick is a special counsel at the Thomas More Society. Like, are you kidding me? The patron saint of lawyers. Thomas More societies are, Catholic lawyer guilds. And Pitlick also went to Jesuit Boston College, Jesuit Georgetown, and the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. Like, are you kidding me? This is now like a judge on the United States District Court. Like, all roads do, lead to Rome. But yeah, I'll wrap it up there. Any closing words from you guys before we sign off?
Yeah, no, I got to go. I'm having constant problems. George, you can close out for me. Great show, guys. Way to come back. We got to do this again real soon.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we'll keep in touch and just, we got, so much information.
Okay, well, talk to you soon, Johnny. Take care.
Hours and hours.
Oh, we could. Take care, guys.
Okay, Johnny. All the best. Yeah, do you want to close up, George? I'll wrap up with what I summed up there with that super Catholic lawyer, Sarah Pitlick, being appointed this last month by Trump.
Okay, so we'll definitely have to do this again within the next week or so.
Oh, definitely. Just yeah. Well, my schedule is pretty free. Like I'm just
Okay,
I
so
have work, but just my mornings are pretty freed up.
okay, so
I was
we'll
saying,
keep in
do
touch.
you have do you have any last thing? Oh, definitely. But do you have any last thing you want to get out today before we sign off, or are you good?
Oh, okay. So do I have anything else to put out? Well, this is something I meant to mention earlier. We were talking earlier about the 2009 film Law Abiding Citizen, and how at least three. Okay, you were talking about Jamie Foxx's character, how he went to law. His character went to Fordham Law School, and how I guess he got trained on becoming a torture specialist. Okay, this is something Eric John Phelps or one of his friends mentioned years ago. For decades, Hollywood has basically told you one, what they have done, two, what they're doing right now, or three, what they're going to do. The purpose, the now, I'm not really sharing anything here. I'm just making commentary. Okay, you want to go to a place like Georgetown. I mean, assuming you're Lucifer and all that sort of stuff, you want to go to a place like Georgetown or St. Gregory's Pontifical Academy or something like that, so you can make connections. Well, when you're applying for a job, when people are looking at your CV, they say, "Oh, you went to Georgetown. That I must hire you over everybody else because that means you're obviously more qualified."
And that's what
Because
happens. Guarantee it. That's what happens. They say you go to Georgetown. Okay, stamp him
uh,
in. He starts next week.
okay, also now people. Okay, one of the reasons why people will go to a big name school, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, non-Catholic schools, is because the name recognition. Oh, you went to Podunk U? Where is that? I've never heard of it. Well, since I've never heard of it, it must not be a very good school. Oh, you went to Georgetown. I've heard of that. They have a great foreign school. Isn't the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Services there? Oh, okay, yeah. Without knowing the first thing about you, you have that foot in the door, so to speak, and you can network with people who've gone before you. People have been going there for what, 200 years or something like that. And of course, you also have schools, regardless of where they are, they have alumni associations. That's how you can network and to get into certain fields. If you want to work for a bank, if you want to work for the
Oh
New
no,
York State
George.
Government.
I found recently. I found Georgetown has an alumni club in Paris, like an exclusive kind of like first class like facility right in the heart of Paris, France, just for Georgetown alumni.
Oh well, I did not know that, but it does not surprise me because it's almost impossible to surprise me. And so you have the context, you have the name recognition, and you also have something else. Some you know how I mentioned to you in a show a couple. I know we're going long, and this is my last point. About a month ago, or about 6 weeks ago, I was looking at an online video from the Catholic Archbishop of San Antonio, Texas, Gustavo Garcia Silar, and he was talking about the recent shooting that had just taken place in El Paso. And he said, we need to combat racism. Racism is a sin. We need to love our brothers and sisters who are coming from north of the border and welcome them into our new country. Um, and he was criticizing Donald Trump for some of the rhetoric that he had used. Well, it turns out that Silar, there's a couple interesting things about Garcia Silar. One, he was born in Mexico. I repeat, he was born in Mexico. Therefore, he is not a native born American. Second, Garcia Silar got a master's degree from St. Gregory's Pontifical Academy in Rome, the premier Jesuitical school in the world. It outranks Georgetown. So, as I said, he got a master's degree in psychology. So, he's an expert on manipulating emotions. He's an expert on propaganda.
Oh, definitely. As a master's in psychology, he's probably read like Edward Bernays' classic Propaganda from 1927, which basically that's basically that book is basically like a blueprint on how to like manipulate a society, for instance. Bernays worked for the CIA and Knight of Malta, John J. Raskip's Liberty League. Great point. That this guy's an expert in psychological warfare manipulation.
So, anyhow, anyhow, so we'll probably have to pick this up on the next broadcast.
George, I found CNN. This guy's it's Archbishop Gustavo Garcia Silar. He's mentioned in this 2014 CNN article. Let me just pull up this article. Like showed how like the Catholic priests in America like all live in mansions. It's actually a pretty good article. I think the author though, Daniel Burke, their CNN correspondent, went to Georgetown, so there's limits to what they'll expose. But you can see if you see the screen. It says here, Archbishop Gustavo Silar of San Antonio lives in a 5,000 square foot residence, which includes a courtyard, private chapel, and a fireplace and wet bar. The residence was built by Garcia's predecessor in 2009 for $1.1 million. It's interesting though that these priests are preaching like humility, and you need to like do well with less. Like they're preaching that like we're all for the people and for the poor, but they live in these huge houses. And I have this house up here on the screen. Over $1 million.
This is something Johnny had mentioned in one of the Michael Vorse's broadcasts. The Archbishop of New York, Timothy Michael Cardinal Dolan. This is according to Church Militant. He lives in a palatial abode which is worth at least $35 million US. Most movie stars don't live in places that expensive.
Oh, just George, keep going. I'm going to pull up that photo. It's linked in the CNN article. You can see my screen. This is Dolan's mansion right here. If you can see, like, are you kidding? This is right in the heart of Manhattan. And yeah, like you said, CNN appraised it at $30 million. But you can see my screen there. Yeah, and CNN said that $30 million was a low appraisal. But I don't know if you can see the screen.
Okay, well, according to Church Militant, it was 35. So we'll say 32 and a half. Anyhow, and of course, that is his main residence. This is something, of course, he had a cottage and probably a winter retreat in Florida and things like that. So this is supposed to be a churchman, a cleric, of the poor. Of course, and the court doesn't talk about his transport, his jets, things like that. A visual coach when he has to fly over to the Vatican or across the country or anything like that.
Yeah, the CNN quotes Dolan saying, "I also find myself living above my living arrangements because that's a pretty nice house I'm living in." So he acknowledges that he's living in a mansion. This one's interesting here, George. Just Archbishop William Laurie. I don't know if he's still the bishop in Baltimore, but he lives in a mansion that was inhabited by the Jesuit priest John Carroll. I'll pull that up on the screen here, and I'll link that. This is a really good CNN article. I linked the photos this is the mansion where Archbishop Laurie lives, and John Carroll supposedly lived here. And there's another one that was really big. I think the second biggest mansion they list after Dolan was the ex-bishop of Chicago. He's been replaced by Kusich, but Cardinal Francis George. You can see the photo. Supposedly his mansion is worth $15 million, and that's a low estimate, according to CNN. That's the photo on the screen there.
Oh, okay.
That's a huge house.
One last. Okay, if I could just mention one other thing. We're talking about the entertainer Liberace. He actually died. You obviously don't remember him, but you can YouTube videos of him if you're interested. Well, the last interview he did was in December 1986, just a couple of months before. And it's interesting that he brought up this point. He talked about a present that he received from Donald Trump, a fur coat. Trump, I guess, he taped the show Chicago, December 1986, and just prior to that, he had been in New York City and he was hanging out with Donald Trump. And as a present, I guess as like an early Christmas present, Trump decided to give Liberace this fur coat, which was worth thousands of dollars back then. So you may be saying, well, what's the big deal? Because Donald Trump has probably rubbed elbows with a lot of famous people. But you're just wondering, why is it he likes, I don't mean to sound judgmental, but why is it he likes hanging out and socializing with people with questionable sexuality, vis-a-vis Jeffrey Epstein, Rudy Giuliani?
Well, it shows Trump made the I found the official White House press release. He made a pedophile Archbishop, now Cardinal Thomas Wuerl of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
He was on the Trump's Presidential Commission of Scholars, like the official commission. This was after he was outed in the Pennsylvania grand jury report for covering up pedophilia there in Pennsylvania.
Okay,
and you're going to Trump's comments about his own daughter. It just the evidence shows that he's a deviant guy.
Okay, let me just clarify something. I'm not talking about doing business deals with socializing.
Well, this goes into the Eyes Wide Shut. If you've seen that movie, like the aristocratic class that's displayed there, like the elite, they go to all of these parties. Like the Al Smith dinner is like an expression of that. You can see, every year that event goes on. That basically is a party. Like they're having drinks there, like there's music being played. So like ballroom scenario or situation.
And of course,
people like the wealth that these guys have, though, like it's just incredible. The mansions, multiple properties, like etc.
In multiple countries.
Oh, absolutely. Even Jeffrey Epstein, even he had a place in Paris, also, including the Virgin Islands. He had a few properties down there too. Property in New Mexico, Palm Beach, New York. That's just So like the wealth of these, just I showed a picture of this, but just look up the Schronberg man. I think it's called the Schroburn Mansion in Austria, where the Habsburgs live. Like this thing is just enormous. Like you can't even I don't even know what the real estate value of that Habsburg mansion in Austria would be. But it's basically like a castle. It takes up like acres and acres and acres of space. Yeah, these elites, are people just average people, George, can't comprehend how rich like the elites are. And most of the elites are Catholics or secret Catholics. They all, serve the Vatican, whether they're Catholic or
well, of course, something I was watching on the Al Smith dinner, the 2016 Al Smith dinner. Almost all the people there were Catholics, or now you did have a few non-Catholics there. And I think I might have mentioned this to you before. The MC of it was Al Smith IV. I believe his grandson or great-grandson, Al Smith, the politician. Well, he was making, and I'm sure you probably caught this, he was making a joke about Henry Kissinger, Michael Bloomberg, and things like, and then somebody else. And he said, and of course, these men are all devout Roman Catholics. And everybody busted up laughing. But I was just wondering, was that actually a joke?
Well, I don't. Kissinger. People don't know this. He became a professor at Jesuit Georgetown University in 1977. I've reposted the Washington Post article even. So Kissinger, he knows by becoming a professor at Jesuit Georgetown, he's aligning himself with the Jesuits.
But I just wondering,
Kissinger was this. I mentioned this guy. I did a blog post on this guy. I'll link this because it's pretty detailed. I list quotes from Vernon Walters. He's basically like the first Henry Kissinger. Kissinger's kind of like a roving ambassador who's served like 5 or 6 presidents. Vernon Walters was doing Kissinger's job before him. Walters is a Knight of Malta, educated by the Jesuits in Stonyhurst, and Walters actually he writes in his memoirs about how he kind of tutored Henry Kissinger, brought him. And another one of Kissinger's mentors was Alexander Haig, who is educated by the Jesuits at Georgetown, was a Knight of Malta, and had a Jesuit priest as his brother, Francis Haig. So everyone around Kissinger, were literal Jesuit coadjutors. He became the professor at Georgetown. So it makes you think Al Smith IV wasn't joking. It's a smart way to put out the truth in plain sight and make it seem like there's nothing to it if you put it out as a joke.
Well, what I've heard that one of the best ways to disarm people is with humor.
George, that's probably why there's a lot of Jesuit-educated comedians. Bob Newhart, Merv Griffin, et cetera, throughout the years. The Jesuits definitely know that comedy, can put the blinders on people. And it does. I think some of the biggest, it seems like there's just so much distraction. It seems like there's always a new comedy special coming out on Netflix, which is just, sucking up people's time. But
just getting back to Al Smith IV's comments 3 years ago, and when he was making this comment about Michael Bloomberg and Henry Kissinger, said, "Oh yes, they're good devout Roman Catholics." Ha ha ha! Everybody knows Henry Kissinger is Jewish. Is he? So, and of course,
even with Bloomberg, Cardinal Egan campaigned for Bloomberg when he was running for mayor. Bloomberg was on the Epstein list. Bloomberg's chief media advisor, Eric Weirson, went to Jesuit Georgetown as being Bloomberg's chief media advisor while he was mayor. So he could also be, just like Kissinger, be a secret Catholic. Bloomberg's longtime police chief, Jim Kelly. Raymond Kelly. Police chief of New York. I think it's Raymond Kelly. I'll pull up his name here because this is the guy who initiated the stop and frisk policing in New York City. He's Bloomberg's longtime police chief, but he's on the board of the Alfred E. Smith Foundation. So this all it ties right back in. I mean, I think it's Raymond Kelly. I just want to make sure the name's right. Yeah, Raymond Kelly. He took over. He was chief of police twice in New York. He was police chief from 92 to 94, and then 2002 to 2013. So he was also Catholic Giuliani's police chief at the latter half of Giuliani's reign, and then he was police chief for the entire duration of Michael Bloomberg, or the majority of it. He went to St. John's University of Law, Catholic, went to Catholic Manhattan College, was vice president of Interpol, and then Kelly is now on the board of the Alfred E. Smith Foundation. And he was the guy who it was basically just him. He was the big advocate for stop and frisk policing in New York City, which turned into just racist policing. They'd just stop and frisk black people on the streets. They'd never stop and frisk the Wall Street executives, for instance. But they stop and frisk a lot of poor people in New York. But that was Raymond Kelly, devout Catholic, who in this day, Bloomberg made this papist his police chief. Why would a Jew do that? Knowing the history of the Catholic Church and the Jews, even knowing the history of the Catholic police terrorism against Jews in the United States with Charles Coughlin in the 1940s. That's the subject of the Herlins Report. J.J. Murphy wrote about this in his article "Catholic Anti-Semitism" from the Converted Catholic magazine, which I have on my archive page. Just the odd thing that Bloomberg would do that, appoint this literally arch papist who's now on the Alfred E. Smith Foundation board, Raymond Kelly, as his police chief. Or Giuliani appointed him, but Bloomberg just kept him on. Bloomberg went along with the stop and frisk policing. Never, had nothing bad to say about it. It's just interesting. And his media advisor, I think that's a big one too. Eric Weirson was appointed by Bloomberg to be his media advisor. He went to Georgetown.
Okay. Could I this is I know it's after 2:00 Eastern. It's 11 o'clock here. I was talking to somebody recently about why I did not vote for Donald Trump back in 2016. Well, I didn't vote for any of the candidates. And I said, well, I mentioned that he'd gone to Fordham back in the 1960s, and the fact that all of his children, or at least 3 of his children, have gone to SJ schools. And of course, you mentioned recently that his daughter Tiffany is currently going to Georgetown Law School. Now, people might possibly give Donald Trump a pass for going to Fordham in the 1960s, over 50 years ago. Well, because maybe he didn't know any better, or maybe his dad Fred paid for it and he didn't know any better. But when you send 3 of your adult children to Jesuitical schools, no, there's a pattern there.
Oh, absolutely. And his sister, Marianne Trump, gave $4 million to Jesuit Fairfield University during the Trump's election cycle in 2016. Trump's campaign managers, Paul Manafort, Steve Bannon, both went to Jesuit Georgetown. For instance.
Of course,
there's more advisors. Like even Boris Epstein, his Jewish economic advisor to Jesuit Georgetown. You see, I found another one of let me see if I can find this guy here. This guy actually, okay, so this guy was a Fordham connection, but this guy's currently Donald Trump's White House counsel. Pat Cipollone took office December 10th, 2018. He went to Fordham University like Trump, and Cipollone also went to Covington Catholic High School and attended Rockefeller University of Chicago, where he was the managing editor of the University of Chicago Law Review. And then Pat Cipollone, he's also a founding member of the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. This guy converted Laura Ingraham, Fox News commentator, to Catholicism in 2002. So this is Trump's current White House counsel. So I just want to find this guy here, Dan McGahn. I'll link this guy in the chat. He's Donald Francis McGahn II served as White House counsel for Donald Trump from the day of Trump's inauguration through October 17th, 2018. And then this guy was like an advisor to Donald Trump, though, during his campaign. I'll read that here. Dan McGahn went to Holy Spirit High School Catholic, went to Catholic University of Notre Dame, and then went to Jesuit Georgetown University. And this Don McGahn, let me pull up. He was like Trump's campaign advisor. Actually, he's the nephew of Joseph McGahn, a former Democratic New Jersey State Senator and medical director at Donald Trump's Resorts International. I wonder if there's a conflict of interest there. But so Jesuit-trained Don McGahn served as Donald Trump's campaign counsel for his 2016 campaign. And then after Don McGahn was Trump's campaign counsel for the election campaign, he became the general counsel for the presidential transition team, and then was named White House counsel for the president's new administration. And actually it says here, Jesuit-trained Don McGahn personally recommended Trump nominate Jesuit-trained Neil Garouche to the Supreme Court. And it says Don McGahn also recommended Brett Kavanaugh. So that's another Vatican connection to those 2 appointments, because the Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society also told Trump that he should put Jesuit-trained Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. But just think about that. That's 4 of Donald Trump's campaign advisors went to Georgetown. 4 of his top ones: Don McGahn, Paul Manafort, Steve Bannon, and Boris Epstein.
Oh, okay. So when you're talking about Leo Leonard, are you talking about devout Roman Catholic papal Najimullah Leo Leonard?
Leonard Leo, the vice president of the Federalist Society.
Oh, okay.
He's another papist in the Trump camp.
And of course, something I've mentioned before, the flip side is the Federalist Society is supposed to be conservative or right wing. Well, the flip side of that is the U.S. Constitution Society, which is founded by Peter Rubin, who got his law degree from Georgetown. So,
what was the name? The Constitution Society?
Yes. They're supposed to be all your hardcore leftists, or pretty much all your hardcore leftists. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Larry Tribe, you name it. They're all votaries of that. So you have your almost all your pseudo conservatives are part of the Federalists, and all your hardcore alt left members are part of the U.S. Constitution Society. So that's just another example of the Hegelian dialectic.
What was the name of the founder of that again, George?
Peter Rubin.
Peter Rubin. Okay.
Rubin.
Rubin. Okay. Constitution.
Yes.
We're gonna put his link in the chat. Yeah, that's a great. That does show the Hegelian dialectic very well. Okay, here it is. I found it. Link. Peter J. Rubin.
Okay, you could do this. I mean, I know you've talked about the DNC and the RNC, the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee. You've talked about Tom Perez, the fact that he's Roman Catholic. Both he and his wife were members of the Jesuit Volunteers, and he went to some Catholic institute. I'm not.
Oh, it was the Jesuit school in Buffalo, Canisius.
Okay, Canisius. Well, the current head of the RNC is Prince Priebus, who is a Knight of Malta.
Wait, sorry, I missed that last name. Who was the Knight of Malta there, George?
Okay, the chairman of the RNC, the Republican National
Committee. Current chairman?
Yes.
Well, wow, that's What was the name of Is it Duncan? What was the name you said?
Okay.
Because I'm thinking I'm thinking of two. I think this is 2 chairmen ago. That's who I'm thinking of. This was Michael Steele. That's who I'm thinking of. Yeah. He was I think Knight of Columbus and went to Georgetown. He was had the top position in the RNC.
And I believe
the Hegelian dialectic though is incredible. Like they have papists on both sides on like every issue imaginable. Like the Muslim issue, George. You mentioned Omar Ahmad, founder of Council on American Islamic Relations, militant pro-Muslim think tank. He was educated by Jesuits at Santa Clara. James Zogby, the founder of the Arab American Institute. James Zogby, educated by Jesuits at Lemoyne College, another pro-Muslim institute. And then you have Frank Gaffney, the founder of the Center for Security Policy, is like viciously anti-Islam. And Frank Gaffney went to Georgetown. So like they play both sides on like every imaginable issue. It's that's why they say like the quote left and the quote right side of the political spectrum agents for the Jesuits work in tandem.
Well, I would love to continue the show.
You gotta get over 3 hours here.
Okay, so we'll have to pick this up soon. I hope with the next week or so.
Yeah, definitely. We'll keep in touch.
Okay. All right. Well, take care.
You too, George. All the best. And thanks everyone for tuning in. See you on the next one.